Good evening, everyone, and happy Juneteenth. Sorry, I'm going to turn down my mic there. I'm the one in trouble on that one. My name is Dex Ellison, and I'm a current College City Council member here in the great city of College, Texas. I want to thank each and every one of you all for being here this evening, as well as hopefully the millions following and watching online as well. So we thank you all for that. I want to give a little bit of background about why we're here and doing this today, and then I'm going to go into we're going to have a video, obviously commemorating this special day as well, and then I'll give an introduction of the format for tonight, and then we'll tell you all the folks that will be talking for the next couple of hours, and hopefully not as much of me. So, first of all, obviously, we know what has been happening in our country for a long time. Many communities know that this is not something that just happened within the last few months. And I think one of the things that I've really felt some healing and some forward progress was when I had discussions with folks that didn't look like me, that had different backgrounds, that had different perspectives, came from different areas, and we talked honestly about things. And so that was one of the things that was placed on my heart in order to do this. And I want to thank each and every one of the panelists for accepting my invitation to be a part of this discussion. Each and every one of these individuals that I will introduce tonight, I've had a discussion with. They've touched my heart in some shape, form, or fashion, and I hope that they touch your minds and hearts this evening. We started out Tuesday night with our College City Council meeting. We had a wonderful discussion with our Chief of Police. Officer Cleary was there as the president of the Kyle Law Enforcement Association. And we opened up the book. We wanted everyone in Kyle and anyone else watching to understand and know the current policies and procedures that our law enforcement here in Kyle abide by when it comes to use of force, when it comes to reporting practices, and a laundry list of things. And we had a 3.5-hour discussion about those things. And if you didn't get a chance to watch that, I encourage you to go to the City of Kyle website. All of our meetings are archived. Any meeting we have in this room is broadcast and made public. And I encourage you to go and view that. It was a really good discussion. It was a great starting point. I've learned in my many years of following my dad, who is a great example to me of an activist, of first you have to know and understand what it is that you want changed in order for it to be changed. And education for the public is important. So then the next step was having a discussion about what we learned. And so that's where we are this evening, to have a discussion about what we learned, what our feelings are, what has transpired in our lives to lead us to where we are, and perhaps what are some of the things we're doing in the community. We're going to talk locally. We're going to talk about things nationally. We're going to hopefully get some historical context, and then we're going to have a big group discussion about what we can do next. So with that being said, I would certainly be remiss if I did not commemorate this great day. And so if Mr. Matt would be so kind as to roll our video with a brief description explaining Juneteenth.
Open a U.S. history book, and chances are its author will quickly point out January 1st, 1863. The date President Abraham Lincoln, with one proclamation, orders and declares that all persons held as slaves shall be free. What that same history book might fail to mention is what happened to these words once they arrived on the shores of Galveston, Texas, more than 2 years after Lincoln wrote them. In the 1860s, word didn't travel like it did now, and in 1865, months after General Robert E. Lee's surrender, word of the end of the Civil War had yet to hit the southern state and its 250,000 slaves. And then came General Gordon Granger's arrival in Galveston, June 19, 1865, and General Order Number 3, All slaves are free. Juneteenth was born. While Juneteenth celebrations continued to varying degrees in the U.S. for decades, it would take until 1980 for Texas to become the first state to declare it a holiday. Today, 47 states recognize it and the District of Columbia. A chapter of our history, for far too long left out of the books designed to document it. But no longer. Juneteenth, or as the National Museum of African American History and Culture now calls it, our country's second Independence Day.
Thank you. I apologize for any of those watching. I'm not sure what happened to the video, but hopefully you overheard that. And if you didn't know about Juneteenth, hopefully you'll know a little bit more now. One of the more interesting things that I find in the conversation about Juneteenth, and there's certainly many things that could be talked about with it, was that it was 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation that slaves in Texas found out they were free. I want that to just sit on our minds. Next, I want to go into a little bit of the format of this discussion. So even my panelists had a lot of questions about how this was going to work, and I'm certainly relying on them to have a robust discussion. But I want the audience to have a general sense on what we're doing. So we're going to have 4 different general topics. Awareness. Second one is let us look at the big picture. The third topic is historical connections. And then the final topic is what's next. So for each topic, we're going to have a group of lead panelists. So these people will lead the discussion on that particular topic. Every person on the panel could have an opportunity to talk during that discussion, but we're going to have the lead panelists start the discussion. Obviously, there's quite a large panel, so that was one of the ways that we could help everyone have a chance to talk. So they will be broken up into groups, and I'll explain who will be in those. And then we'll have some general questions and comments to start the discussion, and I'm going to let the panel take it over. One unique thing, though, that you all will see us do tonight is we will have some paddles that we will raise. One side of the paddle says, I choose to speak up. So with every topic of conversation, every panelist will raise their paddle on if they want to speak up on that topic, or on the other side, if they choose to listen. And it could be a really powerful way of saying something without ever saying something. And so I'm going to ask that our panel all participate in that. When we come up to each discussion item, you will hold that up. I will take note of who will be green, which is the I will speak, and I will do my best to get you into the conversation. Sound good to everyone? Sound clear to the audience? Fantastic. I think we're ready to rock and roll. Well, before we do, I'm going to go through the gauntlet and introduce our panel. Like I said, this is a great panel that we've assembled with some folks with plenty thoughts and comments that I'm sure will be conveyed tonight. So let's roll through those. So first, I have to my right, we have Mayor Travis Mitchell. He's the mayor of Kyle, Texas. He was elected in 2017 to the mayoralship. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, for being here. We have Kyle Chief of Police, Mr. James Barnett, here. We have the president of Kyle Law Enforcement Association, Officer Phillip Cleary. We have Kyle Police Department Chaplain and the founder of the KPD Chaplain program and the pastor of the Rock Church, Pastor Marquet. That is what I'm calling the City Leadership Panel. Next, we will have the Citizen and Contributor Panel. First up, and I'm trying to work with you, Matt. I'm looking at 2 different screens. Which one do we have here? Okay, so I have, first up, we have Keito St. James. He is the executive director of the Keito Academy of Ethno-Cultural and Performing Arts. He's a dedicated historian and public speaker. He's also a member of the Kyle Pioneer Family Cemetery and bilingual consultant educator with the Overton Corporation. He is also a Kyle descendant. Next here, at the end of the table, we have Laura McMahon. She's a wife, mother of 2 black adult daughters, a black 17-year-old son, graduating next week, and a dedicated 17-year resident of Kyle, Texas. She's a graduate of Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a historically black college and university. Mrs. McMahon is founder and president of Kyle Cultural Awareness Group that sponsors community events to educate the community and others about diversity and different cultures in Kyle and how they impact the community and the nation. Mrs. McMahon has worked in the Hayes CISD education system for 5 years, is a member of the National Education Association, and attends school board meetings. She initiated cultural awareness activities at her local campus and has encouraged the district to acknowledge these cultures as well. She was an active participant in the removal of the Dixie Fight Song and Confederate flag paraphernalia from Hayes High School. Ms. McMahon's involvement in city council meetings, local community events, and at Hayes Hill Baptist Church echoes her strong belief in diversification and racial reconciliation in Hayes CISD and Kyle community. Thank you for being here, Ms. McMahon. Next, virtually, we have Mr. Ben Wempe. He's a husband and father to 3 beautiful daughters, and he's a J.P. Morgan private client advisor. Thank you, Mr. Wempe, for being here. Next, I have Mr. Winston Dean, also virtually. He's a stand-up comedian and former teacher at the largest African-American school in Central Texas, Judson. He is also host of Tidbits and Randomness podcasts. Thank you, Mr. Dean, for being here. Next, as well virtually, and I believe in New York, we have Mr. Richard Robinson. He's the director of marketing at BrainJuice LLC, and he's an R&B recording artist and Jamaican immigrant. Thank you, Mr. Robinson, for being here. Next here in person, to my right, to your left, we have Miss Vanessa Westbrook. She is a Hayes County election judge and member of the Hayes Historical Commission, former instructor at Texas State University, and former executive director of the Calaboose Museum. Thank you, Ms. Westbrook, for being here this evening. Also virtually, we have Mr. Bill Simone. He's a Marine veteran, managing principal and chief financial planner at Simone Financial Group, a local financial planning and investment management firm. Thank you, Mr. Simone, for being with us. Next, I will introduce these 2 together, Ms. Gladys Carrillo and Mariah Santos. They are with Mothers for Black Lives, a group created to support and stand in solidarity with the black community as mothers, grandmothers, sisters, daughters, and allies in response to George Floyd's murder. Our goal is to promote reform in our local police policies, raise awareness against systemic racism and injustice, and create a safe space of peace, love, unity, and respect for people of all ethnic backgrounds in the Hayes community. Thank you all for being here this evening. Virtually, we're going back again to Mr. Trace Shelton. He's a lifelong resident of Buda. His father, Bob, was a longtime football coach at Hayes High School, I believe 47 years, if I'm not mistaken. And his mother, Beverly, taught in Hayes CISD Elementary School for many years. His grandfather, Tom Green, was a Hayes ag teacher for whom an Hayes CISD Elementary School is now named. He is married with 4 grown children, one of whom is African American. Trace is editor-in-chief of In-Store Magazine, a trade publication for jewelry retailers. Thank you, Mr. Shelton, for being here. Next, we have Mr. Ruben Castaneda. He came to Central Texas almost 40 years ago and a Kyle resident since 2004. His wife, Grace, is a teacher with Hayes CISD, and his son, Charles, is a Hayes High School grad and in attendance tonight. He's a student and going into his senior year at University of New Orleans, where he is a mechanical engineer student. Thank you, Mr. Castaneda, for being here. And last but not least, we have Mr. Bud Wymore virtually as well. He is a 35-year resident of Hayes County, dedicated husband and father, business owner and lawyer practicing business and real estate litigation. Thank you, Mr. Wymore, for being here. All right, that is our panel. As you can see, there are a number of different backgrounds and professions and perspectives that could be brought to this discussion, and I'm certainly looking forward to it myself as well. So with that being said, we're going to jump right into the first topic, and that is awareness. So on this first topic, our lead panelists will be Ms. Laura McMahon, Gladys and Mariah, Ruben Castaneda, and our city leadership panel. Certainly, as I said earlier, I would like for all panelists to raise their panel as I proclaim the questions and topics for this first topic, and then we will go forward from there. All right, we got some people already eager. So awareness. These are some of the things that were talked about as far as this particular topic. And I want to start it off with this. Why are people protesting? Not only across this country, but the entire world as well right here. As well right here in downtown Kyle. Will my panelists raise their paddles? All right. What do we got over here, Ms. Westbrook? Oh. Okay, we gotta speak up here. All right, let me see what I have online. All right, we've got some listeners. All right. And Mr. Simone's ready to speak up. All right. Mr. Robinson, did we get yours? All right, fantastic. So we're going to start actually with our panelists from Mothers for Black Lives. We did tell a little bit about your platform, but we would like you all to start the discussion.
Great. Thank you. I know everyone here today has seen the reactions across our country and all over the world in regards to the recent events involving the murder of George Floyd. Some refer to this death as an act of police brutality. Some call it lethal force. Some only see racism. In the end, no matter the terminology used to refer to this event, a black man was killed at the hands of someone in power and authority. This is what the outrage is about. A community that is tired, scared, and angry. Anger is one of the 5 stages of grief. The media fails to mention that and instead highlights behavior that continues to feed personal biases and stereotypes about a community that is hurting. If someone actually addressed the grief the Black community has experienced as a result of generational trauma, perhaps they could empathize with people that have suffered fear and sorrow perpetuated by constant acts of racism, injustice, and violence. As a member of the Kyle Buda community, I empathize with my Black brothers and sisters and wanted to show my solidarity. I also wanted to express to my friends and family that I valued their lives and want them to feel safe in this community. One way for me to do that was to be verbal about my stance against racism and injustice. Another way was to show my support to the Black Lives Movement. So I organized the first peaceful protest in Kyle and encouraged others to support, like myself, as mothers summoned by George Floyd's last words calling for his own mother. This is how the Mothers for Black Lives group was created. The group was formed to show support and solidarity to the Black community. Our goal, as Mr. Dex already mentioned, is to promote reform in local police policies, raise awareness against systemic racism and injustice, and create a safe space of peace, love, unity, and respect for people of all ethnic backgrounds in the Kyle Buda area.
Having said this, as members of Mothers for Black Lives group, we are grateful for the opportunity to be present here today to provide feedback to city officials. There are a number of initiatives that could promote safety and trust amongst residents of color in the Kyle area. We have developed the following concrete action steps for your consideration. Remove the use of the carotid restraint technique amongst your officers effective immediately. conduct intentional outreach to community members of color, and increase positive visibility of law enforcement in the neighborhoods on the east side of IH-35. Engage more community members of color in local government and utilize more accessible virtual platforms for them to participate in city-related events like council meetings. Create a community coalition to increase community partnerships, prevention efforts, and wraparound social services available to the public. Enforce more frequent training specific to racial profiling, cultural competence, diversity and inclusion, and de-escalation techniques on a biannual or annual basis. Conduct a community needs assessment by an outside entity to better assess public needs, challenges, and barriers to create trust with law enforcement. Increase hiring and recruitment efforts of people of color in order to promote diversity and women, whom studies shows tend to be more effective than their male counterparts in avoiding violence and diffusing potentially violent situations amongst your officers. We hope that by initiating this dialogue today, City Council and local law enforcement will take a more proactive role in addressing racial disparities and injustices within our community. We all as leaders, Mayor and Chief of Police especially, have an obligation to speak out against racism in our community because opposing racism is not about politics. We need to stop politicizing racial injustice. Speaking out against racism is purely about valuing human life. We urge you to use your platforms as respected leaders in the community of Kyle, make change and work to build trust with people of color in the community who are disproportionately impacted by racism and social injustice. We must all agree, until we have justice, we cannot have peace. Thank you.
Thank you all. Let's see, I'm going to keep it to the lead panel right now. Do we have Ms. McMahon? Did you? I'm sorry, I didn't get you down on your paddle. You have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to thank Gladys Mariah. Your words are exactly, everything that we are looking for. I do concur that the people in Kyle are angry. Basically, we need to be heard. A lot of times, blacks and brown individuals are often dismissed and they are dehumanized. And so right now, for the reason they're protesting is, number one, to be heard, to be acknowledged as human, and also to acknowledge there is a problem that exists. And in order to fix something, you have to acknowledge there is a problem. So once that acknowledgement is reached, that the community can work together with the police department, with government agencies, to come to consensus to help stop black and brown people from being murdered. I ask that at this time that the police department, the government, and those listening are willing to open their eyes, their heart, their ears to see, to listen, and to work, to do. Let your actions speak louder than your words.
Thank you, Ms. McMahon. Do we have Mr. Castaneda? It looks like you want to.
Yes. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? This is a poem by Langston Hughes, 1951, almost 70 years ago. What we see right now is we see exploding. We see too many dreams deferred from black and brown people. We see too many dreams have the life crushed out of them like a knee on somebody's neck. I was glad Dex gave me the topic of awareness, because I think to be aware, we have to be aware of our history. We have to understand that white supremacy, racism, racial discrimination are embroidered into our culture. Look at the history. 1836 is when this state was a republic. after the independence from Mexico. Look at the Constitution of 1836 of the Republic of Texas. General provisions under Section 9 states, and I'm paraphrasing, slaves will remain slaves. The legislature cannot outlaw the bringing in of slaves. Slave owners couldn't even emancipate the slaves without consent of the legislature. And freed people of African descent could not reside in the Republic of Texas without congressional approval. Go back to the Declaration of Secession, when Texas seceded and became part of the Confederate States. And I'm going to read a little bit of it. But this is what Texas, the leadership of Texas, decided to say when they seceded, that we hold as unalienable truths that the governments of the various states and of the Confederacy itself were established exclusively by the white race for themselves and their posterity, that the African race had no agency in their establishment, that they were rightfully held and regarded as inferior and dependent race, and in that condition only could their existence in this country be rendered beneficial or tolerable. It goes on, that in this free government all white men are and of right ought to be entitled to equal civil and political rights, that the servitude of the African race as existing in these states is mutually beneficial to both bond and free, and is abundantly authorized and justified by the experience of mankind and the revealed will of the Almighty Creator as recognized by all Christian nations. While the destruction of the existing relations between the two races as advocated by our sectional enemies would bring inevitable calamities upon both and desolation upon the 15 slaveholding states. Now, that might be ancient history, but it's really not, because of where we come from, and as I said, it's part of our culture. It continues. Even during Jim Crow in 1905, close by in Lockhart, Texas, an African-American man who was a community leader. His name is Jonathan Larimore. He was a teacher. He was actually, I want to get this right, the chairman of the Republican Executive Committee in Caldwell County. He was dragged out of his house, and he was shot by a mob of white men. Why did they do this? Was he accused of murder or rape? He was accused of acting arrogant toward whites. And not to say that, you know, that was a long time ago, but just recently, and some of you who've been here for a while, for at least 8, 9 years, know about this. 2012, Hayes High School, Hayes CISD, one of the few African-American teachers at Hayes, and this is 1 year before my son enrolled in that school, resigned because her classroom was vandalized. Her door was vandalized with KKK, welcome to hell, and the N-word. She resigned. I think at that time Hayes had only 16 African-American teachers. These are dreams deferred. These are dreams that are being crushed. And that's why, as Ms. McMahon said, we are angry. My wife is a teacher with Hayes CISD. She's African-American. My son, as Dex pointed out, is a smart young man. He's a mechanical engineering student, was on the honor roll last semester. In addition to that, he's playing basketball at the university, so he has got his plate full, but he is exceptional. My wife is exceptional. She's been teaching for a long time. So my goal in what I'm saying is that we need to be aware of where we've been in order to know where we are, so that we can know where we're going. The two ladies, Ms. Santos and Ms. Carrillo, I love that they are allies. We all need to band together because as it is, it cannot be sustained. We see that as things are exploding across the country. So we appreciate everybody being here and appreciate Mr. Ellison for giving us this platform.
Thank you, Mr. Castaneda. It's very thought-provoking. Pastor Curl, I saw you had your paddle up, and before you start, I know I called this the leadership panel up here, but I encourage this panel up here to speak not as mayor, not as chief, not as president of KLALA, and not as necessarily as chaplain. Speak as Marquet Curl, speak as Phillip Cleary, speak as James Barnett, speak as Travis Mitchell. Mr. Crow.
I have absolutely no problem with that. So we have a kind of a unique set of circumstances that can lend to this topic of awareness. We have what I would consider dual pandemics that are happening simultaneously, that are giving lending itself to one another. We have the pandemic of COVID-19 as we're all sitting here with masks on, and the threat of a virus that could affect our respiratory system. This pandemic has slowed the world down, and for many of us, it made us stay at home for 2 or 3 months. And during the 2 or 3 month period of time where we were staying at home, we have the pandemic of racism that's been around much longer than COVID-19 that now rears its head for all the world to see. But it's not new. It's been around, as Ruben said, since the foundation of our country. However, it is a lived experience for some, so some are becoming aware, while others it's been a lived experience, and others are just now finding out about it. I am a soon-to-be 48-year-old African-American male that's graduate-level education, 23-year corporate career in corporate America as an executive, and have had my fair bouts with the pandemic of racism being raised in East Texas in the 70s and 80s. I've dealt with it as an adult of driving to my home and being pulled over in Round Rock, Texas as a 40-year-old executive because the officer felt like the house was too nice for me to live in, even though I opened the garage to the house. Being here in Kyle and moving to Kyle in 2016 as we planted the church here, and being one of the few African Americans that will sit in the Texas Pie Company and eat lunch, and having to deal with the whispers of who is that? Who is he? Because it's got to be someone different, special, to be sitting here in this particular facility at this particular time. And so I think that if we only have the myopic view of it being between African Americans and police, then we're going to miss the moment. If we limit it to just African Americans and the police, then we're not aware. This is not a African American versus the police situation. That is what's under the microscope at the moment. But the much more broader view is you're dealing with an issue of racism that stretches across different zip codes, stretches across different backgrounds, different occupations, different genres, different communities, and is something that we've dealt with as a country from the foundation of our country, and it's interwoven in the fabric and the foundation of our country from the beginning. And some people are just now becoming aware of it, but for others of us, it's been the lived experience. And so I'll talk a little bit more about the complicit nature of the church once we get to the history component, since I'm the only pastor that's on the panel, and I've got a lot to say about the complicit nature of the church as it pertains to this issue of the pandemic of racism. But I think that if we're going to be aware, we've got to broaden our scope and broaden our thinking, and it's got to go past just African Americans and law enforcement, and it's got to branch out to our entire community and our entire nation, not just pitting one organization against a group of people.
Yes.
Thank you, Pastor Kerr. Well said. I think this is already kind of divulging into a larger conversation, which I love, but I would love to loop back and get some of the folks that talked. I'm going to continue down the panel, if y'all don't mind, up here on the dais. Did you have some comments?
Yeah, absolutely. This was kind of the topic I was most looking forward to, the awareness factor. I think, we talked about 2 pandemics currently right now. I was a victim of the first, of the COVID one, but the second one, as an Irish American, I've never dealt with it firsthand. I've seen the aftermath of it, especially being a police officer and some of the people that I've interacted with in the community. So I guess right now I don't have a ton to say, but I am looking forward to listening and just to get more awareness about it, what your guys' experiences with it, especially locally, to see how we can address those issues. individually and make it, I think change starts with us. So, I want to look at it at the local level, really be aware of it at the local level, see what you guys are experiencing and your awareness of it, and hopefully we can kind of grow from there.
Thank you, officer. Mr. Barnett, Mr. Mitchell.
Okay, thank you. So this is the awareness topic, so I kind of want to share some experiences with you from the Kyle Police Department's perspective. So I'm going to speak really in relative terms of the last 2 weeks so that you know that we're listening, that you, the community, know that we are open and our hearts are open, our eyes are open, our ears are open so that we can listen and learn. For those of you who either attended the city council meeting Tuesday night or maybe you tuned in, I think I spoke for about nearly 2 hours in some ways on this topic on the police department, and I'm not going to do that tonight, but I want to just share some of what I think were maybe the most meaningful moments in Kyle PD in the last couple of weeks. So Pastor Curl is our police chaplain, and he comes in and he helps us with so many things. He helps us when we're struggling internally. He helps us share bad news with people when they've lost a loved one in an accident, and he goes with us to hold their hands and tell people that tragic news. He does a lot of things for us, and one of the most important things he's done for us is he's opened our eyes and our hearts, and he's shared a lot of good wisdom with us. But about a week ago, he brought in a group of young adults. Many may go to your church. I don't want to dare say all, but many may go to his church, and most, if not all, were Texas State students. These were young adults. They were African-American young adults from roughly 18 to 25, and I didn't ask them, so I hope I don't offend them, but that's roughly their age group. And they came into the police department, and we really didn't know what to expect on our end, but we knew we wanted to listen. We knew that we wanted to hear everything that they had to say. And this group of young adults came into the room, and I can only imagine how nervous they were when they came to the Kyle Police Department to sit in with a bunch of police officers and other police staff and talk to us. There really wasn't a platform, but it was a chance for us to get to know one another and share what was in our hearts. So these young adults began to go down the line and talk to us about things that are of concern to them. The relationship that they have with police officers, the treatment they receive from interactions with police officers, trust, fear, dislike, you name it. And we heard it all. So as they went down the line and they told us about their lives and shared moments in their past, things that they had experienced, I want to tell you what happened at Kyle PD that day. And again, I'm just talking about the last couple of weeks. I could probably give you some examples from months and years past, but these really hit home. So these young adults began to tell their stories, and we probably had about 30 police staff members in the room with them. We got everybody in there in the big room, and what I saw for the first time were young adults sharing experiences in a way with our staff that made our staff open their eyes in ways that I've never seen before. They heard the stories all the way to their heart, is what happened. When we heard from a young lady who talked to us about a traffic stop, and she told us about a police car pulling up behind her, and she automatically got nervous, which I bet everybody in the room gets a little nervous when the officers pull up behind you. Nobody wants a ticket. Nobody wants your insurance to go up, all the things. I wonder if I'm doing something wrong, or I wonder if they're going to think I did. And she went on to describe how they drove a few blocks, and ultimately she was stopped by a police officer. Now, this young lady, she's probably around 20, 21 years old. And she talked about being pulled over by that police officer. And she begins to talk about, as the officer makes his approach to the car, she's nervous. And I'm thinking in the audience, I would be too. Nobody wants a ticket. Nobody wants insurance. Nobody wants to be in trouble. But what she told me broke my heart. She told me that what she was afraid of was she was afraid that she was going to get killed on a traffic stop. She was so frightened by the mere fact that a police officer had pulled her over, that her life experiences and things that she had been told and maybe taught to fear or told or witnessed on the news, we see that stuff. Her fear wasn't a ticket. It wasn't getting it in trouble when she got home because she got pulled over. Her fear was that she may get shot and killed by a police officer. And it absolutely broke my heart to hear that. Police officers do not get into this job to have people afraid of them. And I saw officers with 22 years experience, 10 years experience, sit there with their eyes wide open and their mouths just hanging because they couldn't believe what they were hearing. I did not think, I've been in this business 28 years. I have never thought that people would look at me because of the career that I have or color my skin or whatever it may be, but my job, to think that I am there to kill them if I stop them on a traffic stop. Never crossed my mind. And that was one seed in that entire conversation that has stuck with me. There were many other stories, and I know I need to wrap up my part, I apologize. We continued, we had the rest of the meeting, we heard stories, we heard people speak from the heart. And if we didn't already, I promise you the people in that room began to hear and see in a way that they didn't see and hear before. And we actually invited that group and we got them in smaller groups. They came back Friday and we asked them more direct questions. They came back Monday and we asked them more direct questions, meaning, how can we help? How can we make it better? How can we improve our relationships? How can we improve our interactions with the community as a whole? What are the things that we can do to make sure that you don't fear us? No one fears us. We don't want them to fear us. We want them to see us as helpers. Yes, we are enforcers, but I certainly don't want anybody that gets pulled over on a traffic stop to think for one instant that we're there to cause them harm. So in the following days, we've had a lot of internal discussion in the police department, and I assure you that our hearts and our eyes and our minds and our ears are open because we see you, we hear you, and if no other time before has proven it, what you are seeing in the last couple of weeks and what you will continue to see at the Kyle Police Department will prove it to you. So our awareness, we're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnett. Before I move to the next panelist, I have to ask this question. And, I listened to, it was very passionate and raw and real from your heart speech the other night and recapping that in a much greater length than you did now. And I know you kept it short for time. I have a question that I'll direct to the two officers. You said that, you had officers 22 years experience, 10 years experience, and hearing these things. How is it that these officers have been in law enforcement for that long? And as Pastor Crow spoke earlier about dual pandemics, and not have seen this or heard this cry or understood that pain that people in your community are having when they've been in law enforcement that long. Can you help us try to understand how that could happen?
I'll try. So the officer that has those 22 years of experience has been right here in Kyle that entire time. Longtime servant for this community. He is the type of officer that when he encounters people that are in struggles, he's the one that helps. And I'll give you two very, very brief stories about him. When he encountered a homeless couple that were living in their vehicle in the Target parking lot, he encountered them one night when he was out on patrol. He went over there to check on them, and he made his contact with them. And when he learned that these were people that needed help, they didn't need enforcement, they didn't need removal from the city, they didn't need jail. He's the guy that went and bought them food out of his own pocket. When he encountered a homeless person, again, that was in the general area that was walking from one town to the next, that didn't have shoes on his feet, he's the guy that went and bought shoes for that person. And he didn't come back to the station and champion his efforts. He didn't brag on his good deeds. His co-workers found out about it when they encountered those people later, and they told him what that officer had done for them later because they were so appreciative. He's the officer, and I'm speaking specifically about this one, since we talked about him. He's the guy that would come in this room and help every one of you tonight with whatever your need was until he collapsed. And he's probably never had a negative experience personally for somebody to say, I need you to listen to me because of what you just did to me, because he treats them respectfully from the beginning. And he probably just never had an environment, an open discussion where somebody shared something with him, because he's the guy that when he came around, his actions, his treatment towards them, his professionalism, his compassion already showed them that he cared, and they probably didn't feel the need to convince him of the injustices that have been done for decades. They felt that he already understands, that he appreciates people. And I think that's probably why that officer's eyes were so open on that particular day, because I think he treats everybody equally and fairly, and he gets it. And that's just my perception. I didn't ask him for that follow-up. That's just me, because I know the heart this officer has. He's the one that when somebody broke down on the interstate, they were traveling from out of town, they were pulling one of those U-Haul trailers behind their vehicle. He took them, he ended up giving them a ride to a hotel, helped them get a room for the night. He went back to their trailer that they had to leave on the side of the road, and he went and bought a lock for it, put the lock on it, went back to the hotel, drops the keys off for him and said, hey, I secured your trailer and I locked it up. And he did all those things out of his compassion and empathy for others and out of his own pocket and whatnot. That's my answer to why I think that one person, his eyes were open.
Thank you. Cleary.
So I don't know if there's a law enforcement officer that's been in this career that hasn't had some run-in with kind of the fallout of racism. I can tell you a quick story about myself. I've been on nights for about 3 years now, and I've only been an officer for about 3 years, but pretty early on in my career, I made a traffic stop on I saw it as a vehicle. I had a headlight out. As working nights, I'm big on lights because it's a safety issue, not only for the person driving that vehicle, but for other vehicles as well. When I approached the vehicle, it was an older African-American man, and I just noticed his hands were rigid up on top of the wheel, and he was shaking. And through talking with him, he was terrified. I was pulling him over not because I couldn't even see him, because he had a headlight out, because it was a safety issue, and I wanted to ensure that him and everyone else around him was safe. And in talking with him, we were able to kind of relax a little bit, and I explained to him why I was there and why I was doing what I was doing. So I've seen that fallout of racism. I mean, obviously, that gentleman has had some experience with it in the past, to where he had the need to be that fearful of me. There was no aggressive action taken on my part. It was a very casual conversation, but he had that preconceived notion of fear when I approached that car. So I've seen the fallout of it, and I'd be willing to bet every law enforcement officer, not only in Kyle but everywhere, has had that reaction with somebody. So I'm trying, as the president of our association, as an officer in the city, and just as a member of this community, that's what I'm trying to be more aware of. I can go out and spend, every minute that I've had with somebody on the streets and be completely respectful of them. But I know it's still happening. So I'm trying to, understand where it's coming from and how I can, myself, how this department and how my association can help, change that.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'm going to go right here, one of you, because then I'm going to bounce over here to get one, and then I'll try to come back for the other.
So I wondered that as well, Dex, as you made your question, and I think one point I want to make is that if an officer of a community does not have an understanding of the challenges that its population faces, it really doesn't know its community. There is a huge difference, Chief Barnett, between empathy and sympathy. You gave prime examples of an officer who is a civil servant and was being sympathetic in his job. If he were truly empathetic and had an understanding of those individuals that he was offering aid to, he would know what they were feeling and why they were feeling it.
I'll politely disagree with you and say that I think his actions are because he is absolutely empathetic to somebody who needs shoes, who needs food. He provides that to them and doesn't ask for any reward, recognition, or anything in return. He does that out of his heart because he's compassionate and cares about others.
Right. Compassion is different than empathy as well.
Thank you. I want to step in and say, I know we're talking about local here, and obviously, there's a lot of feelings with that. I do want to remind us that, thank you, sir. I do want to remind us that, this is a large discussion, and I know it's going to get emotional, but let's remember that I think to that point is that we're talking about an agency and a larger point in policing a community. I think we have great officers. Sorry, thank you. We have great officers with the KPD that certainly have gone above and beyond. I think, when you look at a community, though, there is some fear and there's not an understanding between there. So I'm going to go here to Ms. Westbrook. You had your paddle up.
Thank you. Let me start off by saying my profession is a scientist, and in regards to the pandemic, that there's two. COVID is one, and this idea of racism is another. So COVID is not racist. COVID is hitting everybody, no matter whether you're male, female, old, young, your ethnicity, nationality has nothing to do with it. It's a vicious virus that's cutting people down, so let's keep that in mind. However, our idea of racism is a little bit different because that comes from a long history. And yesterday I was listening to a law professor from Harvard who had just written a new article in the Harvard Law, and she was talking about something in reference to collective memory and how collective memory of negative experiences has created this fear among law enforcement. And that collective memory is something where those who have either experienced something negative or saw something firsthand or saw it on TV now have a collective memory of negativity, and that brings on this idea of fear. Tuesday night when I heard the chief talk about his experience with those young people, which I highly commend having those kind of conversations, and he spoke about the young lady who talked about the fear she had. I thought about that for a minute. I was sitting right there in that audience, and I said, at what point did I, a 60-year-old woman who has multiple degrees, who's been a college professor between Texas State and UT, start fearing the police? At what point did that happen? Because it wasn't always like that. I grew up with the police in my neighborhood in Galveston, Texas, and Officer Lemons was at our school and those kinds of things. So at what point did I start fearing the police? And I thought about it as I sat there, and it hit me, Sandra Bland. Sandra Bland is when it hit me that I should fear the police because we were very similar. I was a little bit older than she was. Basically, I was somebody driving down the street and has often moved over into another lane to allow the law enforcement to pass by, and that's why she got stopped. And I started thinking, because I was driving between Austin and Houston to go to trainings as a college professor, should I stop doing that? And my family actually started calling me and saying, you're going to have to make other arrangements. You can't do that anymore. You can't make that drive because of what happened to Sandra Bland. And that was so disheartening to me. And I put it aside because, and I didn't think about it until he said, that young woman talked about fearing for the police. She's 20 years old, 21 years old. She's a college student, etc. She fears the police. I'm 40 years older than her mother age precisely, and I have the same fear because if I get stopped by the police, will I survive? Not the ticket, not the insurance, will I survive? And I don't think that's right for some reason. There's something wrong with that I'm a law-abiding citizen. I've done my time as an educator and been an engineer, been a scientist. I live right up the street in Kyle, and I should be able to go to HEB and not be worried that if I stop by the police, am I going to survive. Really? So I wanted to bring that up. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that the chief mentioned a couple of statistics, because I'm a scientist, I'm a statistics girl, mentioned a couple of statistics that were of concern to me on Tuesday night. When he was giving a report about the number of incidents that we had in Kyle and how those numbers in respect to the ethnicity of the person, the numbers seem larger in the minority community than in the majority community. And I'm trying to figure out how does that happen? How does the majority of the community is, say, Anglo, and I'm hesitant to use those terms because that's a sociology thing and I'm not a sociologist, but how do you have larger numbers among the minority of the people in regards to arrest and those kinds of things than you have in the majority of the people? Seems like it's not adding up to me. And so I just wanted to put that on the table as a statistic to talk about at some point. How is that happening? So those are the three things I wanted to bring up. This collective memory that I think we have to work with overall. Why is it that there is a fear? And let's not just pick on the police department, government in general, housing. There's lots of issues that goes. I don't want to just pick on the police department because I also am a firm believer that there are not every bad policeman is a bad policeman. I used to be a teacher. You could say the same thing about them at some point in time. So let's be clear on that. But I wanted to throw those things out there in regards to this discussion we have now about awareness and this idea of fear. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Westbrook. I'm sure we could circle back through this quite a bit. And it is something I definitely don't want to move on, but I do want to be respectful of the other panelists here as well. We're going to move to the next topic, but however, panelists, you should know that it's all still a big discussion. And if you want to bring something back up from a previous topic, by all means, speak your piece. So next, we will move to our topic. It is titled, Let Us Look at the Big Picture. Before I do that, our IT department, do we have our video queued? Are we going to be able to show it where everybody can see? The other video is actually a better video, but as far as quality, not necessarily because of the quantity. Okay, here we go.
I want every white person in this room who would be happy to be treated as this society in general treats our citizens, our black citizens. If you, as a white person, would be happy to receive the same treatment that our black citizens do in this society, please stand. You didn't understand the directions. If you white folks want to be treated the way blacks are in this society, stand. Nobody's standing here. That says very plainly that you know what's happening. You know you don't want it for you. I want to know why you're so willing to accept it or to allow it to happen for others.
Thank you, Matt. That's Miss Jane Elliott there. Thank you, Matt. Just wanted to put that out there in the thoughts and minds as we move into this next topic. So, as I stated earlier, this is not the first time communities have spoken about concerns and fears regarding policing, social injustice, various different things, and disparate treatment. This is also not the first time awareness and unrest is happening as a result of injustices and blatant racism on display. I wanted to ask the next panel, is this moment different? Why or why not? Is systemic and institutional oppression and racism and bias a real concern? Social injustices, is there disparate treatment by law enforcement in predominantly black and brown communities, or just a few black and brown people in predominantly white communities? If so, why do we believe that? And how can we help communities understand when discussing said issues that we must remain focused on that problem that is being cried out about? Our next panelists will be Mr. Bill Simone, Mr. Ben Wempe, Mr. Bud Wymore, Mr. Winston Dean, and Mr. Rich Robinson. So we're going to be looking at the TV quite a bit on this one. But same as before, I want my panelists to raise their paddle. if they want to speak on this topic. Sorry, let me get everybody. All right. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to open up to the panel. Take it from there. I'm sorry, I should give it a little bit more direction. Mr. Simone, you actually had your hand up.
My name is Bill Simone,
from the last one, so
financial planner
I'll
here,
start
at
in with
Financial
you.
Group here in Kyle. My experience in this city has been nothing but pleasant.
Sorry, while we get that technical difficulty figured out, Mr. Dean, did you have your paddle? I think you're still on mute. We're going to get this figured out.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I want to first start off by saying thank you for having me as a part of this. This is awesome that we're getting this together. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, which isn't Kyle, Texas, so I could only speak from my experience. But I would like to start off by saying, guys, America is a social experiment. We aren't like other countries that are, for the most part, more homogeneous in nature. We are very much more heterogeneous. We have a lot of different cultures, a lot of different people. And right now we are failing that social experiment. Like somebody said earlier, it's not just policing that we're dealing with. It is multifaceted and it goes deeper than just policing. I'm not going to go into all of that, but I would like to say, I think it's crucial that a lot of things that we do with everything needs to be changed. I think that when it comes to the micro level, what you can do personally is diversify your friend circles. Have your kids having other people of other races be their uncles, their aunts. When you have that going on and they're calling somebody who's black their uncle and they're white and they think nothing of it, that's when you have movements towards actual change. That's when you have people that start to actually see other people as the same as them and not different. That's not something that really goes on that frequently right now. Also, I think what is crucial on the macro level is we need to look at science when it comes to a lot of the things that we do with how we treat things, namely drugs and the way that we police drugs differently among certain communities. For example, if you look at the book, The New Jim Crow, which is written by Michelle Alexander, it talks about the fact that there are more people in prison right now, more blacks in prison than there were slaves at the height of slavery. A lot of them are for nonviolent offenses. So that needs to change. We need to look at a difference in how we look at addiction. It's the leading cause of recidivism is not criminality, it's idleness. And our institutions set up so if you become a felon, you can't get a job. If you can't get a job, you're more likely to fall back into drug habits. All of this is to say that a lot of things need to change. And until we can actually discuss the problems that we have societally, we're going to have these things that happen, like George Floyd being killed, that are just showing it's the symptom and it's bigger. Okay. So I can't put the words perfectly together, but it's not just policing like was stated earlier. It's deeper than that. And until we start to actually have these discussions like we are having right now, nothing can really be made to actually get better at that. So I'm going to cede my time right there. But I hope that, I know it's a running train of thoughts, but on micro level, diversify your friendships, guys. Everybody in here, if all your friends look the same, think about that, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Appreciate that. We're going to go, I believe, Mr. Robinson in from New York. Did you have your paddle up for speaking? I think you're on, is he on mute?
I did.
Okay, fantastic.
I did. Okay.
Take it away, Mr. Robinson.
So I'm here because I want to share, obviously, my thoughts and my personal experience. I know we've been beating up on police, but my personal experience has been with police. And then also, I'll make a second point about socioeconomic issues that kind of led to a lot of what's going on in society. First and foremost, people ask why we're angry. That was a part of the first initial panel. And it's because when we talk about why Black Lives Matter, you know, a subset of the community or our citizens or Americans get upset. And then they hit us with the all lives matter. And then we have that whole conversation about who's more important. It's like oppression Olympics among people of color and so on and so forth. So my issue, I'm a Jamaican immigrant. I've been in America for 26 years. I grew up also in Galveston, Texas. I've lived in Central Texas and now reside in Austin, Texas. And I've had my personal experience. We talked about what makes us afraid every day. For me personally, it is policing. It is being worried that I might get stopped and I might not make it out. And it's all based on my experience. So I want to read what happened to me. It's one of the most traumatic things that ever happened to me in my life. And it was very hard for me to talk about. Up until a few weeks ago, I talked about it with a group of my friends, and they really encouraged me to, say something. So I wanted to just share my thoughts. So I'll lead with why Black Lives Matter. I wanted to lead with that first and foremost. The last few days, weeks have been heartbreaking for me and everyone in the Black community. I spent a lot of time crying every single day because seeing the video of George Floyd losing his life, I can't explain why I was more emotional at this time around when it's happened to us every single day. Maybe it was the vile look on the officer's face as Mr. Floyd was taking his final breath. Maybe it was him pleading for his mama before his life expired. Maybe it was the complete disregard for his life and the collective apathy from the officers that didn't intervene and just watched. Maybe it was the fact that it was being recorded and knowing that if the person recording hadn't been there, this wouldn't have been news. Maybe it's because I feared and still fear for the person's life who was brave enough to stay and capture Mr. Floyd's final moments, knowing there could be repercussions. Maybe it's because I'm reminded of my own trauma that I endured 16 years ago when I was in the same situation after being profiled, beaten up, had guns drawn on me, had my head and face stepped on and pepper sprayed, thrown into the back of a police car, taken to jail, and sat with pepper spray in my eye for 4 hours, just because I fit the description of being a Black male while walking home from work to my home that's 3 blocks away. Maybe it was the fact that I had to do probation for 6 months. I never missed a day of school. I'd never gotten in trouble. I was a straight A student because no one believed me. And because if I weren't guilty, I wouldn't have run or been afraid. I was a straight A perfect attendance student who missed 0 days of middle school and high school. I never got in trouble. Haven't been in trouble since. I was lucky. So many people are not. I feel guilty for being fortunate to not have ended up the way so many of my people have. I hadn't been able to really voice my thoughts because I didn't want to make anything about me and diminish what is happening now. I wanted to say something because I've never discussed it with my closest friends who come from all walks of life. These things happen to your Black friends, and we carry that trauma and fear daily. What I want, from this panel, obviously, is to touch on what Winston just spoke about, is community. If you don't have a diverse background of people within your circle, you can never, I know that you can never understand what it's like to be that person and feel what they feel and empathize, but having a conversation, knowing who you surround yourself with and really diversifying yourself and being around different types of group and understanding their experiences can help get rid of some of these racial biases that we have towards each other. That's people within the minority community because we do it to ourselves, we do it to other marginalized groups, and then we also have our oppressors doing it to us. And we will never make any real change in our communities until we understand that it's not the oppression Olympics. We have to work together. We have to collectively try to lift each other up and to really try to facilitate change. So that's my personal experience. That's what triggered me. And that's what kind of got me into just even sharing my story. Another thing I wanted to just make a point of, and then I'll cede my time, is a lot of people aren't aware of the things that have led up to what's happening today. We talk about slavery, we talk about Jim Crow, we talk about redlining, we talk about socioeconomic issues, and none of that's being taught in schools. Not to the extent where people know enough about it, at least. For the people who do go to college, they may get a little bit of that, but we aren't taught economics in the way that we should be, especially in marginalized communities. We don't have the resources that a lot of these other communities of the majority have. And is that because of redlining? Is that because of taxes? Is that because of just whatever, where you live? Maybe. But I feel like from the local level up until the macro level, those are the things that we all need to look at and address, because we know that there are disparities because of where we live and because of who's paying the most taxes. And then we know that we need to reform a lot of those things within the communities and then also on a national scale. So I just wanted to bring up those two points, share my story, and thank you guys for having me. I appreciate you allowing me your platform to tell my story, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I know and imagine that's not easy to share that story also, not only with your close friends, but publicly. So thank you for being willing to do that. And I must say, I love your shirt as well. Next, I want to go to, I know we got Mr. Simone back, but I want to go to, did we have, from my second panel, whom else had, if you could raise your paddles again. All right. How about we go to Mr. Wempe next? He's a private client advisor with J.P. Morgan. Mr. Wempe.
Thank you. Good evening. Racism exists. Systemic racism exists. I think it's very clear from all of my fellow panelists here that they are aware, and I think all of us are here hoping that we can spread the message so that others are aware that racism exists and therefore can start to help create change. With any problem, you can't go about fixing the problem unless you know you have the problem. Again, that's where the awareness comes into play. And so I hope for somebody that's listening to this message that wasn't aware, maybe they are aware now. Once we achieve that level of awareness and recognition, I think what comes next is, at the end of the day, as people, we have to care. As a white person, and speaking therefore broadly for white people, we need to care. I feel embarrassed, ashamed, guilty for not having done something before these last couple of weeks. This is the first time I've ever had a discussion publicly like this in this forum. Why did it take so long? Why did it take 8 minutes and 46 seconds of a police officer's knee being on George Floyd's neck to help resonate and create that movement from within, where I can hopefully be an ally, I can hopefully be a voice for my Black brothers and sisters so that they are treated fairly, justly, and with the same, with equality. Well, why did it take that long? We have to care. At the end of the day, when you think about the racism that is interwoven in our country from the beginning, you have a majority that is oppressing a minority. Black people have fought this fight by themselves for too long. How can the majority change if it's only Black people fighting for that change? As a white person, white people need to be with Black people fighting for that change. The majority as a whole can't change unless black and whites are coming together again to change. So with what Winston said, with what Rich said, I think that you absolutely have to have a network that is diverse. And I think as a white person, you've got to ask questions. You've got to listen. As a white person, we don't deal with the social injustices. We don't deal with the police brutality. We don't deal with the racism that a black person has to go through in this country. So we can't know exactly how they feel, but we can empathize. We can understand to a certain degree. And at the end of the day, hopefully we care enough to want to help create change. And so, again, I hope that people maybe that weren't aware become aware after hearing all of these panelists speak. What I would also say is there's a pastor on this panel. There are those that civil rights activists, historians, those that have studied these topics. You don't have to be an expert in the field. You have to care. You have to have the conversations. You have to listen to black people. You have to hear their plight. You have to hear their stories. But I also think, to take it one step further, as a white person, for those that know on this panel and those listening, Rich Robinson, Winston Dean, and Dex Ellison are three of my closest friends. Us four have had these conversations on numerous occasions. And they've helped me see some of the biases that I've had. And they've helped me realize, Rich told me that story for the first time a couple of weeks ago. We've been friends for 15 years. It helped me see that police brutality and, again, these social injustices, they happen far more often than we may think. Again, we don't experience these things, but we have to have the conversations and listen to understand that they do in fact exist. And they exist in a manner that is just, it's disgusting. It should sadden us. It should move us to want to help create change. Last but not least here, I'll mention, make sure to have the conversations with people that look different than you. But I think where I also need to make a change is having the conversations with people that look just like me. Because for, again, the majority, which is white people, to help create this change of equality, if a George Floyd or an Eric Garner or all of the others that have been murdered or treated unjustly, if I'm having a conversation with a white, if those conversations aren't had, not enough is happening to create change. So again, it's got to happen with the people that do not look like you, that these injustices, these brutalities, but it also has to be more commonly discussed from white person to white person, so that, again, we can all come together and create change. Everyone deserves the same equal opportunities. And again, I hope that awareness and creating this movement so that there is change, I hope that's what comes from this message. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wempe. Want to get to our next couple of panelists that are on this topic, and then we may be able to move around to the other panelists. Mr. Wymore, did you have any comments about what has been spoken about thus far? I think you're on mute.
There we go. Yes, and thank you, Dex, for putting on a great event, and I'm glad that you and I got to connect in advance of this. Two things recently that were said that I think really warrant some comment is, Mr. Robinson, I know you focused on the issue or what we've been hearing more so over the past few weeks, Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. And I think it's important, and I hearken back to my undergrad degree, the message is never the one that you intend to send, it's the one received. People need to understand that making the statement Black Lives Matter does not lessen or abrogate the statement about any other lives. And as a society, if we have people that have a problem with that statement, I think they need to get over it. It is a good statement, it is a worthy statement, and it's a statement that espouses a collective, important social value that all good and decent people hold. Professor Westbrook, I think that you mentioned something important. I'll circle back to this. You talked about the disparity in numbers that Chief Barnett mentioned. And you posed the question why. And I think that's important. Chief, I know that you and I can only sympathize. We can't empathize, but I believe your heart is pure. And I know you try and do the right thing, and I respect and appreciate that. The question that was first asked is this time different and why? It is. We can thank a number of things for that. One of those is technology. The other is that we are looking at a scenario where for many people in America, this is the first time that they saw an egregious act of hate. There was someone that placed their knee on the back of another man and slowly watched life fade into oblivion. And people did nothing. He didn't resist. He didn't fight. He just asked for his mother. And when there's something so clear and stark, you juxtapose light and darkness. Light coming from a voice of someone fighting for life, and darkness coming from a place of someone seeking to exterminate it. Society can understand the problem. The other question was, does racism exist? And I think it absolutely does. The other question was, does institutional racism exist? And this is within the context of police. This is a tough question, and I'm going to tell you why. To refer to something as institutional racism means that the entire institution is a racist institution. I don't believe Chief Barnett is a racist. I don't believe that the hardworking men and women that he employs are racists. We can look across this country and we can find any number of people serving in law enforcement and other government institutions that are in fact racist. Those individuals need to be located, they need to be removed, and they need to be punished for the illegal acts that they commit. Professor, I'm going to get back to your statement about statistics. It's the lawyer in me. I always look for that, and I always walk lightly because we don't want to talk statistics and lessen people's emotions and experiences, because sometimes that can happen. I found an article from 2016 written by Roland Fryer. He is the youngest African-American professor at Harvard to ever receive full tenure. And he wrote this lengthy article analyzing the interplay of race and law enforcement. And the first conclusion is consistent with what you said, Professor, and that is on non-lethal interactions, African Americans and Hispanics are more than 50% more likely to have some type of interaction. And that's a concern. When we see a population that represents not close to half of the US population, but there is that degree of interaction, it's cause for concern. One of his main conclusions was little data exists to understand if this is racial or if this is inherent in the complexity of police and civilian interactions. So how do we fix it? Some of the great ideas that I've heard from people: sending social workers out with police officers, spending more time seeking to understand those that have been arrested, hearing their stories, making that part of the empirical data. What we know at this point is there is some type of disparity. We have to work to stop it. I hope that's helpful. And thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you, Mr. Wymore. I'm going to move to Mr. Simone. We had him at first, but we lost him. I think we have him back. Mr. Simone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I apologize for the computer issues. Technology isn't always your friend. This is a topic that's near and dear to me. I'm a first-generation American. My family is from Haiti. My mother and my father came over to the United States with a very, very clear purpose, and that was to provide a life that didn't exist for me and my siblings when they were back at their home. My parents, my mother lived in Laguna on an island, and her experience when coming over to this country was very different. And she believed in just putting up and accepting, because it no matter what, the opportunities in this country were always going to be better than where we were coming from, potentially. I will say that I am a benefactor of that. I run a successful business. I have a great family. We've been very, very fortunate. I've worked hard to be successful and put myself in a place where I can be a part of this panel and do other great things and invoke change within the industry that I work in as a financial provider, as a financial services provider. But that doesn't mean that I'm immune or separate from the issues that are facing this nation altogether. I am still a Black man. I still take these things personally. When you see someone who passes away on television, it does create a visceral reaction, and is creating a visceral reaction now. But I have to respectfully disagree with that. This is the first time that many people of this generation are seeing this. I've had personal friends and family. You've had personal friends and family, if you have people of color that you know of that has had this experience. I've had the conversation about how to interact with police, eyes front, lights on, don't touch anything, keep your hands as high. And we have seen time and again examples of those lessons that are taught to us as people of color, and even still shot. Philando Castillo, licensed gun holder, shot. My friend Manuel Loggett in California, out walking with his daughters, shot and killed. This gentleman, George Floyd, 8 minutes and 46 seconds, killed. Sandra Bland, on and on and on. We can go all the way back to Rodney King. We can go even further than that, and just take a look at our history and the roots of our policing system, especially here in the South. And what's important about this is the awareness that this issue has created, because it was real, it was raw, it was visceral, it has created a direct emotional impact across not just people of color who have been screaming about this for eons. Right? Martin Luther King literally said, one of the things that we want to work on is to stop the atrocities of police brutality. That was back in 1963. Mm-hmm. And here we are in 2020, still having this conversation. This is not new. Mm-hmm. This is not something that we weren't aware of. In terms of systemic issues, there are systemic issues, and we can take a look at the history of Austin, between East Austin and West Austin. Fortunately, Kyle has been a city that has been, in my opinion, very inclusive. But there's been a time in our history where that was not always the case. And Buda, Antioch Colony, Old Black Colony Road, which is right up the road from here, where there was a history, and that's important for us as local citizens to be aware of. And if we take a look at statistics between interactions between whites and people of color, with police officers, there's a huge disparagement between how the risk and the severity of police officer interaction with people of color versus Caucasians. And we can see that by taking a look at statistics from the Bureau of Justice and taking a look at how they're looking at police officer interactions versus traditional black on black crime or white on white crime. The likelihood of an African American to have a violent encounter with a police officer is 3 times that of a Caucasian. That means that there is an issue. That means that there is some part of training, some type of experience that says that if we see a person of color, or it may not be color, it may be the scenario, the likelihood of the fact that in black and brown communities, there are more police officers in black communities than there are in white communities. The fact that more black and brown people are arrested for minor offenses than whites. The fact that black people have a higher death rate with police officer interactions than whites, even though white on white crime, black on black crime, brown on brown crime, those statistics tend to stay the same, right, within the races. So if we're talking about awareness and talking about bringing to the forefront change, we can't ignore the fact that over the last 50 to 60 years, since the change of the Jim Crow South, we have still consistently seen issues of not just police brutality, but economic inequality, situations where in this country, only 10% of the Fortune 500 boards are made up of people of color, of black people, roughly 15 to 20% of that of men and women across the board. When we take a look at this current administration, where there is only one person of color, one black man on the president's cabinet, that's a position of leadership. That's institutional. That's systemic. That's at the very, very top, and we're not seeing representation. We have not had in administrations this low a representation since the first Bush was president in 1989. So when we take a look at where we are now and saying that and bringing awareness to the issue that we're facing now, it's not just police. And I agree that Chief Barnett and our police department is doing the best they can. And I do believe that for most police officers, their intentions are positive, good. Their interactions are meant to be positive. They really are. But at the same time, I can say that most black people don't intend to say that they don't trust the police. They don't want to be fearful of police. We don't seek out that conflict, but we've created an environment, we've created a society where there is an expectation of it. So much so that comedians literally joke about this year over year over year over year over year. It is not new. The visceral reaction that we've had now was because it was so cold and it was so callous. But we then had another shooting the following week. So when we say that awareness is not enough, and when we say that, is there change? Is this a moment of change? Yes, there is. There's a lot more people participating, but do we think that there's going to be big change? I must say, I have to be honest with you, and I am coming from a person of color and privilege to say that it's incremental at best. And we can't be blind to that past to think that all of the interactions that we're having now are going to lead to a significantly positive outcome moving forward. What we can do is we can hope that this dialogue continues so that both the community and the people that are in power understand that representation is the most effective way to lead to change, right? The population, the leadership of our towns, our infrastructure, our teaching apparatus needs to reflect the community. And when it does not, you do not get change. I am confident that this conversation is going to lead to great movements forward. And I know this because yesterday, last night, I sat down with a gentleman who I've known for a while. We weren't particularly close. We normally share a beer or two together. But he was fuming, and I could tell that there was something on his mind and he was waiting to ask this question. And every Black person in that room, every Black person listening, who's interact with their white friends, or who've been in a professional environment where you walked in and you were the only person of color, and you had to be the person to go ahead and be the ambassador for your race, has had the question come up, hey, as a Black man, do you really think it's that much of an issue? Yes. And then immediately the reaction, well, I just don't see it that way, or I disagree, or maybe it's in the community. Maybe it's Black on Black crime. Yes, crime is an issue within communities of color, so it's the same thing in white communities. I think or we would have the conversation where, hey, you've been successful. Why can't they follow your example? Mm-hmm. Yes, I've been successful, but that was with hard work, determination, and a whole lot of luck. You know, I understand what it's like to struggle and be in that position. Most people of color do. White people do as well. Caucasians also have worked hard and have had their struggles. Where the difference is in the opportunities that come after that, right? The opportunities of leadership, the opportunities of promotion. There is not a history of situations like the Tuskegee experiment, where 40 years of Black men were injected with syphilis and not told and denied treatment so that they can be researched. There's not a history of Henrietta Lacks, where her cancer cells were taken from her and used over and over without any permission from her family, without any acceptance from her family, without any of these scenarios to discuss that. There's been a history of beatings. Rodney King was beaten to within an inch of his life, and those police officers got away scot-free. Today, we are seeing a direct and emotional reaction where the police officers, yes, thank goodness, are being the bad apples are being pulled out, but you can only say that there's a bad apple so much before you say that we may need to replant the orchard. And I think what's important here is that we have that conversation, get to the root of our leadership, get into the interactions with the community, and help each other not just understand and talk past each other about where these issues are, but truly make sure that we are putting in concrete guidelines and concrete actions that reduce that impact. When you add more police into a community, oftentimes crimes may go up in that area. If a majority of interactions with police officers are with people of color, that may mean that you may need to have police officers readdress what they're looking for when they're seeing a traffic light, a pulled out traffic light, or how they're going to interact in that conversation, because yes, it's terrifying. I would be terrified to get pulled over right now. Well, not here locally. I'm known here in town, right? But if I'm driving out to Houston, or if I have to drive past Vidor, Texas, would it be a good idea for me to stop if I need to get gas?
Mr.
Should I worry about my life in that scenario? Point is this: awareness is not just a conversation. It's concrete changes and understanding that there is systemic issues that need to be addressed. Part of that is leadership and representing, having your leadership actually look like the community that you're in, and putting forth an agenda that allows for an open and honest discussion about the things that we're afraid to talk about, which include race and include mistakes done on both sides, and hopefully pushing past those issues in due time.
Thank you, Mr. Simone. Lot to definitely think about and unpack on that one. So what I'm going to do, just because there's some panelists that haven't had a chance to talk, I'm going to open up the third topic, but then I'm going to open it up to those lead panelists to speak first, and then we're going to open it up to the entire panel at this point. So historical connections is the next topic. Why and where is it important to share even the most difficult and dark parts of American and local to call history? How do we remain respectful of the traditions and fond memories of people's major experiences, like the high school they may have attended or other fond memories a community might have? in life, yet empathetic to communities that feel pain or a level of discomfort when living within communities with tributes to a racially divided past. Next, I'd like to bring in our final third panelist, Mr. Keito St. James, Ms. Vanessa Westbrook, and Mr. Trey Shelton. So this is paddle time. Panelists, please raise your paddles. Again, over here. Okay. All right. First, we're going to start with Mr. St. James.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Keito St. James, and I want to talk about, like the historical perspective on everything. I'm actually a Kyle descendant, Claiborne Kyle descendant. The family's been here since Kyle, before Kyle. They're actually from Mountain City. And, I wasn't raised in Kyle. I was actually raised in Hawaii, in California. And I heard a lot about Kyle. My great-grandmother had been paying taxes in Kyle since 1901. And they've actually paid taxes straight through forever. A lot of their land came in the 1860s and 1870s. And they talk about Mountain City. They talk about some families living in Buda. And on a historical level, first of all, what we know as the police department was actually created during the days of slavery. And it was actually the institution was set up to control the slave and non-white population. And so a lot of times, a lot of the implicit bias system, the system of slavery, and the prejudice was built into actually controlling the population. During the Jim Crow eras, again, it was to make sure that there was the colored part of town and the white part of town. Everything was separate colored bathrooms and so forth like that. And so a lot of times the police were set there to make sure that everybody stayed in their place. So a lot of times, sometimes the biases are set up hundreds of years before we know that, before we even know, because it's just assumed that, if you're not in your place and you're not doing what you say, someone can call on you and say, hey, this person's, they went to the wrong water fountain or something like that, And this is over 100 years. Slavery ended, Juneteenth, right? From the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. My great-grandmother was born in 1886, and her parents were born in the 1850s. They were actually, I guess my great-great-grandparents would be born in the 1850s, and they were here. They were here in Kyle, they were here in Mountain City, they were here in Buda. And just to see their history, that I heard about when I was living in Hawaii, and then to come and see it myself, And so their history, and I always compare it to a lot of the Latino population, where there's like two Kyles. There's all the main Kyle and all the different Hispanic restaurants and Hispanic grocery stores. So it's two separate worlds working at the same time, and people really didn't see. So I'm sure that at the time, there was an African-American world working too. So people really didn't relate because they all live in different parts, different worlds. I did have the pleasure of coming to the old Kyle and going to the old city capitol, the city hall, which was a little house over there. And they knew my great-grandmother by name because she had been paying her taxes. Can you imagine a person paying taxes for 100 years? She inherited the land, bought the land from her mother, and then in turn, she paid the taxes from the 30s all the way until the 90s, And so it's very historical. And but at the same time, we also had some dark history too. Like I have a great my great-great-grandmother's son was hung in the hanging tree, And so we have this history about being hung. And so when you are a population that has been either prejudiced against or controlled, people have a certain attitude how they perceive things, They don't react very fast. They react slow. They make sure that they're not making big waves in the system, And these are the systems that they built in to survive, My family actually did very well. My great grandmother, her husband, who was actually from Mountain City, also his family, they moved to Austin in 1903. And they started a movie theater company. First they worked, he was a worker, and then eventually they opened a movie theater in Austin. But yet they still came home and say, where's grandmother? Oh, she's in Kyle, Texas again. What's she doing there, And even in the 90s, Kyle was the country. I mean, you come here, it was just the one center street, And I think I remember seeing the Bonton. It was very, very, But the history is definitely, the implicit racism that the people had to endure was there. We told stories and people functioned on a certain level. My whole thing is to definitely, I was talking to someone in the library and they're like, oh, there's people of color, there's black folks from Kyle. There's no library book that tells about it. So we've basically been whitewashed out of history. So one thing about the family was to come back and say that, hey, we really existed. We really were here. So a lot of times I may make comments like that and show up at the chicken dinner and go, hey, we're one of the people that's from here, because we've been written out of history. We're completely whitewashed, And it's important for the community to say, hey, we want to know about these people of color, these African Americans who are from Kyle. They do have a history. I mean, we call the cemetery the Pioneer Cemetery because we were the pioneers. We're the ones who cut the logs, built the house, cut the trees. It wasn't, slavery for the Kyle community was not big old plantation like you see in the South. It was just a pioneer family. And I always see it kind of like a pond. There was the family who was pretty much the white family, and there was the black family, and it was like a mirror image of the community. Everything that create what is Texas, the people did. And when you talk to a lot of the relatives, they tell you the stories like that, But in the history, we do have a history of someone being hung in the hanging tree, hanged. We have a history of some of the males, because in a society which is a dominant white society, you can't have African American males running around taking over the town. So for some reason they get pushed out some way. So there's history of them, as you know, in the Jim Crow laws, in the days of Jim Crow. If you didn't have a job or you looked like you were doing something that wasn't right, boom, you'd go to jail for minor infractions. And so we do know of some of the men going to jail for a year, for 6 months, for 2 months. We hear about that. But that definitely is a history that needs to be told in Kyle. The cemeteries and the community. And it all really does affect what's going on now, because it's people who even assume that everything was good when there was things happening. We in our family, especially with the pioneers, we don't say the slave cemetery because it was people who were enslaved. We use the enslaved people, the people who survived the Holocaust of slavery. And we think that our families are the survivors. They survived the Holocaust of this 250 years of enslavement. They survived it. They're the survivors, not just the people who were enslaved and their descendants.
Thank you, Mr. St. James. We appreciate that perspective. Thank you. Next, to get even more historical perspective, I'm going to go to Mr. Trey Shelton.
Thanks, Dex. I appreciate you having me. When Dex first approached me about this, I was hesitant to take part because as a white man, I feel like we should be listening right now and not doing a lot of talking. But he convinced me that I had a perspective that might be valuable, and so I hope that it is. For me, I think hearing and seeing everything that's going on, and I feel that education is eventually the key to solving the race crisis in our country. And of course, when you talk about education in Hays County, you have to talk about Hays High School, which was the only high school in Hays, or at least in the HCISD area, for about 35 years until Lehman was built. And unfortunately, of course, the symbolism that was chosen for that high school, which brought Buda and Kyle together, was the rebels, and that then developed Dixie as the fight song, and the Confederate battle flag was used to also symbolize the school. And so, for me, growing up, I was born in 1974. Buda was a pretty small town. Kyle was small. It wasn't as connected as it is today. Austin seemed like a long distance from here. And we grew up in kind of a bubble. And I grew up, my dad was the coach for all those years. And so I grew up all over that high school, at the gym, at the tennis courts, on the football field. And I grew up idolizing the Hays Rebels. I remember the effect that when Dixie would play and everybody in the stands would be cheering together, those of us who were from the area, we identified that as a positive thing that brought the community together. I'm sad to say it now because we were ignorant. We were ignorant in the true sense of the word. We did not understand what those symbols meant outside of our area. I've come on a journey myself over the last 46 years, as I indicated, of moving from ignorance to denial, to defensiveness, to acceptance, and wanting to do something about it to bring about change in our community. And part of that had to do also with we adopted a son out of the foster care system here in Texas. He's African American. His name is Malik. He came to us at the age of 13. And within the first year in our house, he came home one day from school with the N-word written on his arm. And we asked him how that happened. We actually got called up to the principal's office to talk about it. And he said a girl had convinced him to do that to himself and write it on his own arm. And there were other instances like that into high school where we were called in because people were calling him the N-word or whatever. We asked him about it. He's now 21. He's in the Army, based in Colorado. And we asked him about that experience. And he said, actually, that wasn't unusual for him. And he had bounced around from home to home dozens of times in his life before he came to us. But he said he had grown desensitized to it because it had happened so many times. And I think that experience, for me, it helped me move from a place, one of the panelists indicated earlier, sympathy and empathy are different. And it helped me to move from a place of sympathy to empathy and feeling what he was going through and being able to see my own son dealing with that. Really hit home with me. And I think that's what's hitting home with a lot of people now too, seeing what happened to George Floyd, and as many have said, I mean, that is the latest in a long line of killings, unlawful killings like that. You can go to the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama, and you will come out a changed person. They have a lynching memorial that is incredibly powerful and sadly extensive. And so anyway, to bring it back to Hays High School, I'm a passionate believer in education, as I indicated at the beginning. And, I feel that no child should have to go to school feeling oppressed by the symbols of that school. And that's just all there is to it. You know, as hard as it is for those of us who have lived here all our lives and what we identify as community building, it doesn't build community for all of our community. You know, that's the bottom line, and that's what a school should do. And every kid should feel safe to learn at that school, and that's how you learn. And by the way, you know, the whitewashing of history and the history that we learned and the reason we were ignorant about the symbols and about the things that they really stood for, those things need to change as well. So that's what I had to say.
Thank you, Mr. Shelton, for your perspective and your insight on that. You know, it's not easy to share some of those stories and publicly. I know we had some other panelists that requested to speak, and I definitely do not want to stop this conversation. This is a really good conversation, and there's definitely a lot of perspectives that are being had. So I'm going to go around the panel. I want to get some thoughts. I think a lot of people want to speak here, so I'm going to go around the panel. There's one panelist that has not spoken yet, so I'm going to start with him, and then we're going to go around here, and that was Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell has a microphone a lot of the time, so I kind of purposely allowed others to speak, but I wanted to give you an opportunity before we went around the horn with the entire panel. Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Dex. Hard to follow all of that. I love these, by the way, because I feel like this has been the story of my 2 weeks of existence. You know, my name is Travis, and at my house growing up, we have a shelf full of history books, old-timey Texas history books in particular. And my dad made a point to say from the very beginning that you're named after that man, William Barrett Travis. And I love my dad. And I was raised extremely proud of my name because I was named after the man that Travis County was named after and Lake Travis was named after, and it's my history. And when I hear about the Alamo and think of the Alamo, I think of what the story my dad always told me that led him to name me Travis, and it was this image, which may or may not even be historically accurate, of William Barrett Travis pulling out his sword and drawing a line across the sand and saying to everyone, come across if you're willing to die so that we can create the Republic of Texas and defend it against the Mexican army, even at the cost of our own death and certain death. And I remember just feeling, you know, just incredibly proud that that was my history. Guess how many times I knew growing up that William Barrett Travis owned multiple slaves? I didn't even know. It wasn't something that was brought up. Guess how many times I heard what Ruben said earlier about when Texas was originally founded as a republic, an independent country. There were about 30-something registered slaves in the state of Texas, and within 30 years, there were 250,000 in part and in large part because the Congress, when they instituted the Republic of Texas, very intentionally made slavery legal and emancipation illegal. It was about slavery. And it just wasn't something I was taught much, that the state of Texas was not annexed into the United States initially because the powers that be were very concerned about overwhelming the country with pro-slave states. And that's why the Republic of Texas was put forward as a republic and not as a state, and why 30 years later, eventually they were annexed, because they were able to keep that balance of power through other states. For the first time in my life, I was embarrassed of the state flag of the state of Texas, a flag that I have loved my entire life. It's interesting to me because as a white person, I look back on Texas history fondly. And the reason is because when I think of stories like the Alamo, I put myself I see myself empathize with William Barrett Travis and Jim Bowie, a slave trader. That's who I see myself as. It's also difficult for me when I hear stories about lynching or cops, because I was raised to love the police, not to fear the police from day one. I have no idea what it means to fear the police intrinsically. I'm afraid If I'm speeding and I get pulled over, I get nervous. Sure, that's not what we're talking about here. I intrinsically know that the police are there to help me from the day I was born. And I've been pulled over and received plenty of tickets, even some here in the wonderful city of Kyle, Texas. It's been an interesting 2 weeks, hasn't it, Dex? I don't know if it was coronavirus that caused me to not be worrying so much about the Masters or baseball. I don't know if it was just the lack of events that I was preparing myself to go to, or the fact that I was in isolation for a long period of time. But when the story of and news of George Floyd broke, it was just different. I don't know how to explain it. We have this like head in the sand, but what about mentality? That's what white folks do. But what about the fact, you can I didn't get all the angles of it, or, it's not institutional racism. It's just this offshot. It's the bad apple argument. It's the but what about argument. The fact that Texas is a pretty amazing state in a lot of ways. And those arguments are arguments that I've made. What about blue lives? What about all lives matter? Don't disrespect the flag when you kneel. All those conversations. I've said every one of those statements. I've made all of those statements. And at this time, I just realized, I think that the problem is not the Nazi, crazy, anarchist person caricature way out there. And that's why they're not the solution. The problem is in our own hearts, and it's in the way that we treat each other. It's in the way that we view our history and what lens we view it through. It's extremely raw and challenging for me to look back through our history and not try to see the history I want to see, but to see the history that is. And folks have talked to me a lot recently about, Kyle history, and I have learned and reread through a lot of Kyle's history in the last 2 weeks, as well as Texas history. It's just a little different than I remember reading it 4 or 5 years ago. All the facts are still there. Everything I read about the Claiborne log house and the log cabin and Fergus Kyle and the founding of Kyle and our German heritage, which is I have German heritage, so I identify with Mr. Kyle there. Those are the things that I was raised thinking about. And if you read the books, the slavery pieces are in there, but they're not the things that we don't feel it. We don't understand what it's like because we don't know what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. And this has been, really one of the most profound couple weeks of my life. And because for the first time, I feel like not only myself, I'm certainly not unique, but a great many of the white people in the white population have, for the first time, seen it differently, seen it through someone else's eyes. And my only prayer and hope is that this continues. I don't have the perfect sense of, the list of solutions. Gladys's demands were, I read through them all. I was trying frantically to write them down. I'm hoping we'll get an email of those.
I'm more than happy to provide them.
I would love to see it because I missed a few. They were all very good suggestions and things that we should really consider implementing. We have to lead, because when you look back at our unpleasant history, it's I can't remember if it was I think maybe it was what Ben was saying, but my perspective on this is very much that it takes all of us coming together, recognizing the problem for what it is, and then thinking about the future that we want, and progressively and with all the courage we can muster, moving towards the future. When I think about our history, I think, what history do we want to celebrate? Because I've been accused of trying to tear down our history in the city of Kyle. And what I try to explain to people is, I don't want to tear down our history. I want to celebrate our history. Did you know that Kyle is known as the founding of the first commercially sold fajita? There's folks that know that. We need to celebrate those amazing parts of our history. Did you know that in 1995, we had an African-American elected as mayor who served for 10 years? And in 1995, the population of Kyle was 2,000 people. All these new folks coming in, these new progressive types, are not the people that put a black mayor in Kyle It was the population of Kyle when it was 2,000 folks, the generational folks that put a mayor, a black mayor as a black man as their mayor. And we've had an African American on council since then. And now we have another African American leading us and showing us the way. Those are things that need to be celebrated. We need to create and celebrate Juneteenth more robustly than we ever have before. And I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have done it if I was the mayor without these things having happened, because Juneteenth was something I'd heard about in the back of my mind that I would hear, maybe see a little snippet on the news or something would scroll by, and I would have kind of a positive feeling towards it, but never even spend a lot of time thinking about the significance and the weight of the moment of when slavery was finally ended in the state of Texas 2.5 years after it was actually ended, which just goes to show that we have to create the history that we want. We have to create that future and keep fighting, because it starts with laws and then it continues out moving forward with courage and action and a willingness to stand up and speak out and listen. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. So I'm going to go back. I know you're itching, Mrs. Westbrook, so I'll probably start with you. But we're going to go back through the panel one more time. We are over time, but I don't want to really constrain your comments, but still kind of be respectful and thoughtful of that, you know, as we move forward, that we've got a number of people to get through. So I'm going to, let's do the paddles one more time. Make sure let's see where we're all at. Probably got some folks that are, yeah, I bet. Really? Okay. All right. Fantastic. All right. Looks like we're going to move through a lot of people. So we'll start over here with Ms. Westbrook. I know you were really wanting to get in and comment here.
I did. Thank you so very much. You know, often when I speak with my students or I do presentations, I often talk about science and engineering. That's my background. But I'm actually a historian, and I think I got into science because of the history of science, believe that or not. And so often I talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so when we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of history, let's talk about a couple of things here in this area, just for a frame of reference if you may have not known. One of the things is that, okay, so we're aware of Juneteenth. It started June 19th, 1865. The first celebration was in 1866. And for almost 60 years, San Marcos had one of the largest emancipation celebrations in the area. It was held at the Hayes County Fairgrounds. And it was a 3-day event. And it was actually 96 years ago today that event started. Now, why is this significant? Because it was the last one that was done back in 1926. Here happens to be an actual poster from 1926. Now, I know you may not be able to see this. I'll tell you where you can find it. Of this event, and it had the names of the folks who were actually putting on the event for those 3 days, what they were doing, who was invited, etc. Now, I said this was significant because it was 1926. In 1927 and thereafter, they didn't have one. As it turned out, and this is noted in the San Marcos records, that the Ku Klux Klan stopped it from commencing and from being celebrated. And instead, in 1927, they had a Ku Klux Klan rally in that same area to emphasize how they needed membership within the Ku Klux Klan. Remember I said the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay? So with that in mind, as we think about how things have happened here in Hayes County, this was just San Marcos, we think about events and what has led to places where we are now. You know, as my colleague here to the left of me said, that the police was a part of helping to keep people in their place. Well, indeed, the police was used to perpetuate racism. If there was an issue, you called the police. If somebody did something wrong of color, you called the police. Whatever the laws happened to be, whether they were good, bad, or ugly, you called the police. That's still happening right now, folks. Remember, we just heard about the man who got called on because he asked the lady to put her dog on a leash where he was trying to bird watch, and the police came and arrested him simply because she called. Nothing more. So that is still happening right there. So we have to think about how things have led to where they are now. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there was a time that as a black parent, you had to have the talk with your black son about what to do when you come up to the police. What do you do? What do you say? All right? That has perpetuated now. We don't just talk to our black sons, we talk to our black daughters. And that wasn't always the case. To explain to them, here's how you're supposed to act when the police come up. You do this, you do that, you do this. Try to remain calm, don't get really scared. And we've seen instances where this has happened. So I think we're kind of talking about this idea of us and us meaning the community and the police right now, because how police were perpetuating things that were going on back then. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case now, but of course we are seeing instances where that's clearly is the case. I think these are some things that we need to talk about. As we are listening to others around the room who talk about issues that they've had with institutional racism, that they've had with the police, et cetera, I think these are conversations, as we've all been saying, we need to have continuously so that we can try to understand and try to make heads and tails of it. And to say, well, I had no idea that was going on, well, now you know. So what are we going to do next? And I think we're going to get to that in just a minute. I did fail to mention something to you that I thought you should know. I was a policeman for about 2 years. Early on, as I was at a university, I was, trying to put myself through school. I actually went through the process. Now imagine that. Did I not tell you at the beginning that I have a fear of the police? And I was a policeman. Okay, so I don't want to perpetuate on that enough, but I'm just showing this idea, this fear that runs through our community, and we have to do something about it. And I really hope that as we continue these conversations, that we continue to have these discussions. So a little bit about the idea of what happened in our area. At one point in time, San Marcos was known, the MLK Street, which used to be Kamel Street, was known as the Black Wall Street in this area. It was full of black businesses and beauty shops and barbershops and restaurants. And of course, that First Baptist Church is still sitting there that we're trying to work on. But it was an immense area that was filled with people of color who were doing their things and living their lives. Kyle had an area also, and all of this can be looked at on the San Marcos record, because I give you no information that I actually have not looked up. And I say that to you as a former executive director of the African American History Museum. You can actually go and see articles that were written back then that have been put in frames so you can read what was going on during the 1920s and the 1930s and the 1940s, and you can see this actual poster, and you can see the decay that it's in because it was the official poster that was placed in someone's black business at the time to remind everybody about this event that was going to take place. So at this point in time, as we begin to celebrate Juneteenth, much has gone on in this area, and much was stopped in this area by and for people of color. So now that we have a little history lesson, the last thing I want to say is Mr. Rubin mentioned earlier that there was an article of Confederate, and he read parts of it to us. And it stated what they believed in. So now that you know that, do you understand why there's an issue to remove Confederate statues? Did you know that part? That here's what they said they wanted and what they believed in. And everybody who signed that is considered a hero. But are they? Now that we know what we now know? So what some of the panelists said more than anything, and what the mayor said, once we get educated, we begin to rethink things. Seek information to make sure that you know what you're talking about. Seek information to try to understand different points of view, and always walk into the room open-minded, because open-mindedness and being able to sit at the table and talk is half of our battle to see what actions we need to take place to do something else to make things better. I like living in Kyle. I didn't even talk about the incident I had with the police, goodness knows, but I did. And, you know, I'm not the black man, but I had an incident too that really questioned whether or not I should live here. But I said, you know what, I'm doing it anyway. I did. I work, you see me, if you come to vote at a precinct, because I'm a precinct judge, I'm a part of the Hayes County Historical Commission. If you come to any of our meetings or anything, gone to the courthouse, historic courthouse, or gone to the Kyle Depot, you may have seen me there. So my question is, what can we do collectively to get the information out, to be more of a community, to work together? I'm gonna stop there.
Thank you, Ms. Westbrook. I could listen to you for a while. I certainly appreciate that. I'm gonna go over here to, okay, do we have some paddles up over here? Speak up? Okay, Mariah, yes, we haven't heard from you in a while.
Thank you. So I just want to speak on behalf of myself as well, that my position here is not to shame the police officers or the police department of Kyle. My dad, who was an East Austin native, spent his entire life serving the police department, and I have been raised to respect police officers as well, despite even my own experiences with them. It is a call to action as probably one of the youngest people on this panel right now. If anyone has looked at the event on Facebook, the community is questioning our validity of whether or not we belong on this panel. They don't believe that we live here. And part of that is because the population in Kyle is maybe 6% black people. So when I hear people say they'd never heard this before, it's because they never saw. They didn't see us. They don't believe that we live here. And so while I deeply appreciated the young people that were brought into the police department and the police department's opportunity to listen, the reason why they'd never heard these things is because they didn't see us. And that's something that they have to consider as well. So use your positions and leadership as also a businesswoman. There's a heavy presence on social media right now who don't agree that we should move forward. And I'm grateful now that the city of Kyle and the police department is finally releasing statements, but you guys, you have to keep doing it. Keep standing up against racism, because you all are respected, and the people who respect you need to know that it won't be tolerated here. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Castaneda, I'm gonna go to you, and we'll come back around.
Thank you, Mr. Ellison. Kind of go along with the agenda we have. I think it's what's next, and I want to talk a little bit about that. And what's next is, I think this is a start. We have to have these hard conversations with others who don't look like us, with others who do look like us. But I think more importantly, we have to have these hard conversations with ourselves. We have to look inward. What caused me to say this is one of the things Mr. Wymore said, and I must respectfully disagree with one of the things he said. He said that in deciding if there's institutional racism, he thought that was a difficult call to make. I think the complete opposite. It's easy. There is institutional racism in many of our institutions in our culture. And he mentioned the fact that he believes the chief is a good person, and from everything I've seen, I agree. Does that mean that there's not institutional racism in policing in America? There is. You look all across. In Buffalo, New York, 50 whatever police officers resigned from the special force because one of the officers or two of the officers were disciplined. A couple nights ago, I think, in Atlanta, there was a sick out by police officers who were calling in sick because there were charges against two of the officers. That's institutional racism. Does that mean individuals involved in this institution are all racist? No. I disagree with that premise. I professionally work in the juvenile justice system. I defend juveniles in Travis County who are accused of committing crimes. I will tell you, and I've done this for over 2 decades, I will tell you the juvenile justice system in Travis County, one of the most progressive counties in Texas, has institutional racism. Right now, there are 15 children in juvenile detention in Travis County. Okay, they cleared out a bunch of them because of COVID-19, but right now there are 15 children. And they cleared it out about 3 months ago in the middle of March. Out of those 15 children, 8 are Latino, 6 are African American. The remaining one, if anybody here guessed white, you would be wrong. He's of Middle Eastern descent. In the 3 months since they cleared out juvenile detention as much as they say they can, I think they can do better, and we're fighting for that, but that's a different story for a different day. Since then, there have only been 2 white children, those 3 months, who have been detained. And there was a period of time that they overlapped for 1 day, so there was a period of time they had 2 white children. Since they cleared out detention, it's been averaging between 12 and 18 children. 2 white children. Now, I think that's a clear example of institutional racism. There's over-policing in communities of color. Another example, as I said, my wife teaches. She's an African-American teacher. She's told me stories that whenever she's teaching and another teacher in her grade level who has an African-American student has some issue, maybe that child is not behaving quite as well as he should have, they'll hand him over to her and say, can you deal with this? That's institutional racism. There's institutional racism in public education. So we have to have these conversations with ourselves, and I hope that individuals who don't want to see what's out there can look and see there's institutional racism. I may not be a racist, but I participate in the juvenile justice system, which has that kind of racism. That doesn't mean everybody's racist. My boss is African American. One of the prosecutors I deal with, she's African American. Are they racist? I don't think so, but that doesn't make it not institutional. So I would ask everybody here, everybody watching online, to have those conversations. See beyond what you want to see. Look at the facts, look at the outcomes. And with that, I think we can move forward. Otherwise, we're just spinning our wheels and denying and denying. So we need to move forward, and that's what I would suggest, and hopefully that can be one of the steps we can use to move forward. Thanks.
Absolutely. Glass, we'll go to you.
Great, thank you. So, in looking a little bit about our history, right? Texas was Texas and still is Texas to me. A big part of our history is a group of Mexican indigenous individuals that aren't even ever discussed, that are a part of the Black community as well. And so if we want to talk about history, there's a lot that's been erased within that context of the Mexican African-American culture. And there is a problem with it even here. We've already discussed and given a number of different situations, experiences, even from our panelists today, about their firsthand experiences with the local department, with different systems that we've all identified. But in keeping an open mind and wanting to move forward, I really am going to challenge everyone here, and in particular, Chief Barnett, 40% of your population in the city of Kyle are Hispanic. 40%. In 2018, only one person was reported with the cite and release program out of 158 eligible individuals for low-level offenses that include mischief, graffiti, theft, all nonviolent. A large majority of those individuals were minorities of color. So you want to talk about action, you want to talk about what needs to be done. This is something that's happening in your department. It has been happening. And it's a program that can change, and software issues, technology issues, I can't seem to understand how that's a barrier when our neighbors down the street of San Marcos have implemented the program very well. So in really looking at where we are moving forward, aside from opening people's eyes, it's really about evaluating issues that are currently happening and have been happening in this department. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I don't even have to go into personal experiences because, as my partner here mentioned, social media is full of them. And I'm sure you can look them up on your comments. So I just really hope that, today is not just talk. I really hope today is a move towards change. You want real changes. We have outlined a great number of suggestions for your consideration, but it all starts within a self-reflection of you, your leadership, your program, your department, and the way that you run the type of officers that you employ. Oversight and ensuring that training is implemented well are also part of your responsibility as a leader. And so I would hope that that is enough for you to really take a look at what has worked and what hasn't worked, because that's the only way that we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keito. All right, let's see those paddles again real quick. I want to make sure I get through with everyone. I'm looking up at my screen. Let's go virtual next. I have Mr. Dean.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I just want to I'll keep it really quick. I just wanted to address what Ruben said about the institutional racism. Even if you disagree with that statement, at the very least, I think we need to talk about the fact that there is an institutional problem when it comes to policing. I am a former teacher. I went to Reagan High School in San Antonio, one of the most affluent high schools in the area. And then I taught at Judson High School, one of the least affluent high schools in that area. So I saw the juxtaposition and the comparison, the differences, and it is pretty stark. But when I'm talking about institutional problems with policing, what I mean to say is a hypothetical. If you were to take nurses, firefighters, teachers, police, and you gave an initiative and you said, we will give you 20% raise if you just point out to us who you think the bad ones in your department are, teachers, I promise you, as a former teacher, we'd call them out. We can't stand teachers that give out big work, that don't do right by the children. We'd call them out, and then we'd also get a raise. 2 birds, 1 stone. Firefighters, probably the same thing. Okay, you have somebody watching your back, you want somebody who's competent. So if somebody's not competent, you want to get them out of there. Same with nursing, but with other individuals. So I can't say for certainty that that would be the same case with cops, okay? And that's just from my experience of seeing that even the good cops will stand by idly and watch when bad cops are doing bad things, i.e. a cop with his knee on a guy's neck narrating his own death for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And that was one of the first questions that was asked, is what made this different? This wasn't a trigger-happy incident. This was nonchalance at its finest. The guy looked right at the camera with his hand in his pocket and his knee on this guy's throat and looked with the confidence that nothing's going to happen to me. And that is huge. So until we can actually have conversations about these institutional problems, there will be no progress. And until we can admit that sometimes there needs to be some sort of retraining or re-looking at how we hire individuals in the department, then things aren't going to get better. It's just going to be conversation. Action needs to happen as well. And I want to leave it off with this. We keep on talking about people need to listen. An old nursery rhyme goes, an owl sat at an oak. The more he saw, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he heard. Why aren't we more like that old wise bird? So even when you're listening, don't be listening to reply, listen to listen. And I hope that you guys take these words seriously. All the words that everybody's talking about, this whole thing is great, and I'm honored to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. I had some more panelists virtually that wanted to speak up. Let me see those paddles again. Real quick. Mr. Wempe, Mr. Robinson, you all good? Okay, let's go to Mr. Shelton.
All right, I'll keep it brief as well. I just want to say, again, defensiveness is the enemy of learning and progress. So if you're a person who feels the need to say things like all lives matter, or feels the need to try to hold on to the statues of the Confederate generals, or fly your Confederate battle flag proudly, I would just say, look at your motives. Why are you doing that? Is it because you don't like the way it feels to hear things and it makes you feel a way? And I would just say and encourage you, as someone who's dealt with that myself, to try to put that to the side and not think about it and just listen and try to learn, and seek out the stories and seek out the evidence of all the things that everyone's talking about here tonight, and then see what happens. Just try to set it aside. I think that's to me, that's the unfortunate thing of this whole thing is people that feel the need to try to stand up for something when people are just asking you to listen. Just listen, and that's it. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Shelton. Mr. Wymore, I couldn't see your sign, but you've been acknowledged a couple of times by previous panelists. You just want to listen. All right. I'm sorry, you're muted. You're muted.
Yeah, I will say one thing, and I think we were talking past one another on that point about institutional racism. I have never not acknowledged that there are people that are racist, that commit racist acts within our nation's most important institutions. And that's a problem that has to be weeded out, stopped. It's an evil problem. It's unacceptable. And we must do our best as a society to rid our institutions of that problem.
Thank you, Mr. Wymore. Let's go to Mr. Wempe. I think you had your speak up. And you're muted.
Coming to me, Dexter?
Yes, sir.
I'll just briefly say, again, I think to echo what others have said, the topic of race and racism brings out a lot of defensive characteristics or defensive urges. And I would just urge and implore those that if someone is bringing up the topic of Black Lives Matter or a Black person being murdered at the hands of an officer, a person in power, don't change the subject matter. Don't make it, well, what happened before or off camera for why the person was arrested. Don't make it about the flag. Make it about the looting and the subject matter that was brought up is that Black Lives Matter. They matter. They matter just as much as white lives. But you can't deflect. All you're doing in that situation is stunting the change from happening sooner. We've got to listen. We've got to look internally. We've got to look at our biases and perceptions, the preconceived thoughts that we come into these conversations with, and again, be willing to listen. Be willing to realize that you may be wrong in some instances. We don't have all the answers, and again, if you have a more network of friends and people, you're going to hear opinions, views that you can't bring to the table, and that will make you a better person. It'll make you well-rounded, and if each one of us can do, that's again where we will see real positive change.
Thank you, Mr. Wempe. I'm sorry, did somebody say something? I'm going to go to Mr. Simone next. You're muted, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go for it. Before that battery dies. Yes, sir.
Thank you. There are a lot of gaps in this country. There are leadership gaps. We now have the lowest representation in Congress than any other time since the Reagan presidency of Black and brown people relative to the population. Less than 10% of boards of directors in Fortune 500 companies are Black. We have economic gaps. Only 30% of Black Americans are homeowners compared to 70% of white Americans. The median income of Black households is $41,000 a year compared to $70,000 for white households. Black households' average savings are approximately $100,000 less than comparable their white counterparts at the same age and the same profession when going into retirement. We have a legal gap. 29% of people that are currently incarcerated in local jails are sitting unconvicted because they cannot make their bail. 7 out of 10 of those individuals are Black or brown. African Americans, Black and brown people are stopped at a rate of 2 to 3 times more than their white counterparts and are cited and arrested at a higher percentage than the white counterparts for these same types of crimes. We know that there are issues in this country. Every person, most Black people who are in this room or are college educated or had some professional experience has heard one of these 3 phrases. You sound white. You did okay. Why can't other Black people do the same? Or I don't see color. I think unless you're missing a rod in your eye, we can all see color. Right? Else you can't drive down the road, red, yellow, green. We must be able to acknowledge the issues that exist within our communities. We must be able to celebrate our cultures, our differences, and our backgrounds, and celebrate what makes us unique in a way, as a way that brings us closer together. We must have leadership that recognizes the challenges facing a diverse community and is willing to actively listen and work to change those discrepancies. As James Baldwin wrote in his beautiful poetry, and I Am Not Your Negro, he wrote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing will change until it is faced." I'm glad that we are doing this. I hope that this is not just a conversation for tonight. I hope this is a conversation that carries us forward and leads to real monumental change in this country. Because if all we do is talk about it, then we've done nothing for the thousands of lives, the thousands of lynchings, the blacks, the browns, the yellows, and the white people in this country to bring us closer together. Racism is inherent, it's part of our roots. But until we are honest about all of it, then we've done nothing for any of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simone. I'm going to go back to my virtual panelists. I think, let's see. I think we went through all of you all that wanted to speak, going once, going twice. We're good up there? All right, thank you. I'm going to come back around. I know, Best Girl, you had your speak up.
Okay, so I will attempt to bridge build a little bit in history and what's next to try to get us on down the road to go home.
Yes, sir.
So a lot of things we've talked about. We've talked about the systemic issues, the institutional issues, and we've talked about education. We've talked about justice systems. We've talked about all the different systems and the institutions. But if we're going to understand kind of the genesis, if you will, of how all this started in our country, and I told you guys earlier that I'm a pastor, so I got to bring the church in. And I have to talk about the complicit nature of the church in America and the role that the church has played in perpetuating what we are experiencing today. I mean, I could go back to the original foundation of the church. I could go back to 313 AD, where Constantine the Great issues the Edict of Milan, and he ends Christian persecution. But then after that, it's the Romanization of the gospel that takes a Jewish Messiah out of his Jewish context and puts him in a European context. And so then you have the Europeanization of the gospel, which means that you have the whitewashing of the gospel. Even though the Ten Commandments says we will have no graven images, but we then have a graven image of an image that perpetuates the superiority of one race over the other. That's the church. So we have the church that's complicit in this from its beginning. And then we move forward to the establishment of the church in America, where we have the Church of England that issues the promulgation of the gospel in foreign parts. And at this point in time, we have the establishment of America that was not discovered because it was already being occupied, so it was not discovered by someone. But then we have the Church of England that has the promulgation of the gospel in foreign parts. And they had a choice between evangelism and economics. Evangelism, true discipleship, true sharing of the faith, trying to connect people to God, or economics. And the church chose economics. The church has always chosen economics. Our country has always chosen economics. So you have the church now that had an opportunity in the genesis of the foundation of the country, one nation under God, but not the same God. So the church from its beginning of this country was complicit in perpetuating the superiority of one race over another. So then we go throughout church history here in America. We can move forward to every major denomination in this country, whether it's the Baptist, whether it's the Methodist, whether it's Episcopalian, whatever, and every denomination has split based upon race. Whether it's the Southern Baptists who split based upon who wanted to keep slaves and who would not keep slaves. Whether it was the Pentecostal church that split in the early 1900s over Jim Crow laws and whether or not African Americans would be allowed to participate in service. Whether it is a book by Professor C. Carroll, The Negro, a Beast or in the Image of God, where he perpetuates this ideology that African Americans were created on the fifth day, which is the same day the animals were created, not on the sixth day with the rest of humanity, and using that now to perpetuate the difference between the races being perpetuated in the church. And so we have the church that is now complicit in everything that we've done, and then we move forward into the 1960s where we have the civil rights movement, we have Jim Crow laws, and even today, the Sunday morning worship time is the most segregated time in our country. The most segregated in an integrated society. Why? Because the church continues to perpetuate and separate things, and people will go worship their God with people who look like them, even if I work beside someone that does not look like me. So when we talk about kind of the genesis and the education of things, the church is complicit because the church is the entity or the institution that's been responsible for educating a country from its very beginning. And until we as the church, and I use that term very loosely, until we come to grips with and acknowledge those atrocities of the beginning, then there's no chance for us to begin to heal and get better. That's the history that no one wants to talk about. That's the history that gets swept under the rug. We don't talk about those things. We want people to just move forward. And so if you ask me, so what do we do next? Because what happens when there's no longer a pandemic? What happens when 6 months from now, when these things are no longer at the forefront of your mind? Does this flashpoint just be another thing that happened? This is not the first time we've seen these things. It's just the first time we paid attention. We can go back to 1955 and Emmett Till being on the front of Jet magazine after being beaten simply because he whistled at a white woman, or supposedly whistled at a white woman in public. So it's been out there before. We just weren't paying attention because, as someone said earlier, we had our heads in the sand and we didn't want to pay attention because it didn't affect us. And so what do we do moving forward? The first thing we got to do, and I'm a pastor, so I always speak in alliteration, so I have some R's. So this is what I do. And so the first thing we have to understand is there's got to be recognition, which is you have to recognize and acknowledge there's a problem. You cannot see all these things and say there is not a problem. There is a problem. There has been a problem. And the difference is now is you have people that are fed up because if you've protested and marched and screamed and yelled and boycotted and picketed and done all these things and they still don't hear you, then what's the next thing that you've got to do in order to get someone's attention? So there has to be recognition that there's a problem, and recognition by everyone, not just people of color, but those that are of white descent, recognizing that there is a problem. The second thing is there's got to be responsibility taken for actions. I tell people all the time, it may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility. It's not your fault of some things that's happened in the past, but it is your responsibility now that you know to do something about it. It wasn't your fault that some of your ancestors may have had slaves. It's not your fault that you may have been a slave. It's not your fault that you had Jim Crow. It's not your fault of all these things, but it is your responsibility to do something with what you've seen now, because you now realize there's a problem. So recognition, responsibility. And then to a greater issue, from a spiritual standpoint, there has to be true repentance from us as a nation. Repentance and not guilt, not feeling of, oh, I feel so bad. Not, when is this going to be over? Gosh, they keep talking about this. Can we go back to normal? This makes me so uncomfortable. Well, I've been uncomfortable for 48 years, and my ancestors have been uncomfortable for over 400 years. So therefore, a few months of being uncomfortable should be okay for a few people in this country. Amen. In order for us to make progress. So repentance means a changing of the mind. Until there's a changing of the mind, there will be nothing will happen any differently. There will be another hashtag. There will be another march. There'll be 6 months from now when things go back to normal. Nothing different will happen. So we got to have recognition, responsibility, repentance, and then renewal. The Bible says that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So you want to know what a man really feels in his heart, let him talk. And if you let him talk long enough, what's really in his heart will come out. And so until there's a true repentance as us as a country and as a body of believers, and so I'm speaking to some of my white pastors that are out there that are listening right now, that are streaming in, that want to know, how can I help, and how can I help to make a difference? It's helping to educate your congregation and helping them to understand the role that the church has played and the complicit nature in which there has to be responsibility taken, but a renewal of the heart, creating a clean heart and allowing people now that can speak from a clean heart, and now we can have true healing going forward. But if we don't do these things, then we will be here this time next year on Juneteenth having another great dialogue with there nothing coming from it. The Bible says faith without works is dead. James says, show me your faith by your works. So it's good to talk a good game, but where do we go from now, and what things are different, not just with the police department, what things are different in our entire community, and what are you going to do differently now because you know different, because you've learned something that you didn't know before. What are you willing to do differently in order to make a difference in your local community, in the school district, within the police department, within your job, wherever you are? What are you willing to do to make a difference? And so we've got to allow this to be a moment that moves us forward and not just be another moment in history where it was good conversation, but there were no actions that came from it. So that's all I have.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Curl. Well said. And I absolutely concur with that. There needs to be something, and that's why one of the topics was what's next. And I'm glad that you touched on that, and thank you for really rounding that back up. I think the only person I haven't touched back with was Mr. St. James. Did you have a couple of comments you wanted to make before we wrap things up?
No, I'll pass.
Okay, all right.
I can't get after that one.
Okay. And Ms. McMahon?
Amen. Yeah, I'm going to say something.
Okay, quickly. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Yes, regarding where we should go next, I agree with everything Pastor Curl has stated. As a community, diversification is needed in every area. It's difficult, like someone said, for individuals to have empathy and sympathy for you if you don't have someone that looks like you. So that's one thing we need to do, diversification in everything from education to government to, every aspect of our particular area. Something else we need to do as a community, we need to vote. We can't be afraid to vote. In order to vote, we have to educate ourselves. We need to put people in office. We need to put prosecutors, attorney generals, judges, lawyers. We need to put people in office that will represent us. So we can't say we don't have anything to do. We do need to vote. We also need to not be afraid to speak out. For white individuals, if you see something that's wrong, speak up. Don't be afraid to. I addressed one of my neighbors just the other day. They made an inappropriate comment, and I said, wait a minute, that's not appropriate. We have to be comfortable with uncomfortable conversations, as well as, we need the white people to speak up also. Another thing we have to do is, when it comes to policing, I have a few situations I wasn't going to mention, but I don't know if the officers thought it was a playful thing. Our 17-year-old son was pulled over in Plum Creek with a few of his friends, and they made a comment. First, I can't have you driving through here like this. The second comment he made was, let me check and see if you're America's Most Wanted. So at that point, he was nervous, okay? So I don't know if more training needs to be done in the police department. That needs to be addressed. My husband also is a 6'2", 250-pound man whom I love dearly. Whenever we're pulled over, or whenever he, my son, or my daughters leave the home, I pray for them that they don't have a bad experience with the police and they come home safely. To calm those fears, there needs to be communication, there needs to be training, there needs to be maybe someone in mental health that's going to come out with the police department. I know you have programs in place, but we can't not have support for those who are not doing very serious criminal activities. I appreciate the wonderful information you gave on Tuesday. I was so excited about that, but a conversation needs to be had with police about the way they talk to individuals, and it could have been joking, but when it comes to our race, that is not a joking matter. I appreciate the city council. I come to meetings. As I said before, I attend the school board meetings. We fought to get the Confederate flag out. We fought to get the Dixie song out. And some students are even talking about changing the mascot. So look for those things to happen, but we need support. We can't do this together. This is not an individual activity or individual problem. This is a community problem. We have to work together. The purpose of our group is to try to bridge that gap by showing people what other cultures are about. And so that if you learn more, you will be more sensitive and you will be able to understand where they're coming from, how they feel about different events, activities, things around here. I just want to say that I'm thankful to be here. Check my notes one more time. Yes. I've already mentioned voting. Fill out the census as well. I
Yep,
said
there you
vote,
go.
you have to fill out the census as well. That is something that's very important right now. And we do have to educate. Education is one of the most important things. As I mentioned before, I work in education. I encourage my school to have different community events, you know, to talk about different things from the education level to the, as well as to the district. So because of things going on, the Hayes CISD community has created an advisory committee to work on diversification issues. So changes are being made, but we need the community to come together, not be afraid, and speak out and work together.
Well said, Ms. McMahon, and I will, I agree with what you said, everything you said, but I will second and double down on the voting and the participation in the census. We need that, folks. You need to vote. You need to participate in the census. Thank you, Ms. McMahon, for bringing that up. I did want to mention, our comms director has been telling me all night, our comments have been blowing up on Facebook. We're closing in on 300 comments and topics. And so there are folks watching this and talking about it. I know I've seen some hands. I'm not ignoring you. It's just I'm trying to be respectful to the panelists, allow them to their time that they came here and participated in this. Certainly, one thing that we really hope to do is that, as it's been mentioned multiple times, is this is not the one and only. There will be more opportunities for this. We have nonprofits and organizations in this community can help carry this burden, help move this along, and continue this process and working together to do that. This is not about, like she said, it takes us all doing it. It's a community thing. I do want to, I think I've gone through the entire panel with the exception of these three gentlemen right here. Did you all have any final words? Yes, sir. Mr. Cleary, go ahead.
At the beginning of tonight, I wanted to make a big point that, I'm here to listen, that I want to hear what this community is saying and what other people's experiences is. I'm hearing a lot about systemic issues in the community, and a lot more than just policing, and a lot more than just racism. I mean, economic, political gaps in our society that need to be filled. I think a little background on why Dex asked me to be up here. So I am the president of the Kyle Law Enforcement Association. We're not a police union. We're not the regular unions that you see on TV where we're endorsing different politicians and that kind of stuff. We're a 501c3. We are a nonprofit. We have a number of community programs that we do, such as Blue Santa, giving out food at Thanksgiving. So my heart is in the nonprofit. I originally agreed to become the president of the nonprofit because we had an officer suicide, Officer Solis, committed suicide in 2018. So mental health has always been a big issue for me, and it's something that I've always advocated for. So my commitment today, because I don't want this just to be talk, I want to see some action and stuff for this. I am the president of this nonprofit, and I want to reach out to the community that we want to work with you. We want to do things in this community. We want to have a bigger impact in our community, a bigger footprint in the community to be able to help and start these changes. I don't want to see today just be another conversation. I really, really want to see some action from it. But I want your help to be able to do that. So thank you guys. I just want to thank everybody's time tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Officer Cleary. We're good to go. All right. I know we've gone well over the time that we talked about. It was just such a good discussion. There's still some things that I would love to talk about and ask some questions of the panelists and all kinds of things. But I want to thank each and every one of you all. I know that we had various conversations and you weren't sure what this would be about and all the format and everything, but you had faith and you stepped forward and you wanted to lend your voice and your ear and your perspective to your community. And so I thank each and every one of you for that. And thank you for your support and coming together for this. I hope many more times that we can do more things like this, but exactly what was said. These discussions are important, and they are difficult discussions, and sometimes they can get pretty emotional, but we have to then take these discussions and move them into something more actionable. Before I wrap up with my comments, Mr. Mitchell, I'll go to you real quick.
I think some of the folks in the audience realize this, but it needs to be said that Councilmember Dex Ellison has spent the last 2 weeks pretty much every minute of every day preparing himself for this wonderful forum, and you need to be commended here for bringing this together. Would not have happened without you. I've had the opportunity to get to know this man for the last 4 or 5 years. More and more every year, I've gotten closer and closer to him, and you've helped to open my eyes, and your leadership in this community is being felt every day, and just thank you. Thank you for putting this on and helping our community to continue to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. You know, and you've come to know me over time, and you know I'm not big on those things like that, but I know where your heart is, and I certainly appreciate that. You know, and I'm going to wrap things up here. And I want to thank those that have watched online tonight, that have commented. I certainly will probably spend a lot of time going through those, and I'm sure some of the panelists probably will as well. But, you know, this, as we stated at the top of the hour at the beginning of this is, you know, there's been some events that have transpired in our country over the past few months that have brought this back into our conscience. But it has really been something that has been going on for decades and decades, and longer than I've been alive, longer than many people that have been alive in this room, and even, I'd say, everyone in this room. I've taken a journey these past few weeks in talking to people and having a discussion and trying to really understand what in my platform and my role I could do in this community. And I just wanted to make a couple of points before I wrap this up. You know, I came to this community the first time ever on a school bus with my football team at McCallum High School. And it was to play a playoff game against Bastrop High at Hayes High School. And this was the early 2000s. And I played on a football team in North Austin that at the time the school made up exactly what America's population kind of looked like, about 70% white, about 12% black and Hispanic, things like that. And I played on a football team where there was a lot of prejudice, there was a lot of bigots. They were flat out racist on my team. There were people that used to joke on my team about the cotton field that our practice field used to be. And when they would make little silhouettes of us playing another team, you could see the not so subtle sometimes images that they were displaying. But you know, it was North Austin, and it wasn't really blatantly in your face. It was kind of very subtle. And then when I came down here on a bus with my football team, 2 consecutive years playing our playoff game at Hayes High School, and both times I ride up on a school with those images. And at that time, still the flag and all these different things. And no, we weren't playing Hayes High School, but that was the school we were going to. And I remember very vividly on that bus as a 17-year-old young man thinking, man, I know there was racism at my high school, but this is just in your face. And I felt like it was like a scene out of Remember the Titans. And you know, 2 years in a row I had that, and then lo and behold, never knew. I would go to Texas State University and then move into Kyle, and have been a resident of Kyle for 10 years now. And it's a city that I love. It's a city that has embraced me. It's a city that has given me a platform and encouraged me. And all those things, yes, are true. And there was a gentleman that spoke earlier as well about a privilege, even as a black man. I enjoy a privilege here in this city that is not typical of a black man in this city. And that's something that has really been thrown in my face these last few weeks. And after having all the struggle with my dad and going and protesting and being raised as a man to understand more than what you hear in the typical history books, now I was placed in a position where everything before that, I was seen as a black man, but now as an elected official, it's like I'm no longer a black man in many ways, and as well as realizing that privilege that I have in this city. You know, and I think about running for office in this city, and you know, for anybody who's run for anything or gone and fundraise or anything, going up to strangers is it's tough, even for the most outgoing people. But as a black man in a city where it's 5% of us, and going on knocking on doors in this city, I was scared as hell. I'm gonna tell you that. I was scared. And I would be conscious of the sun. And as the sun would come down, and being conscious that, like, I've got to hit these number of doors, but I can't be out before it gets too late. That is a true fear that I've had. And there's other fears that I've had in this community. And I say this, and I look at you, Chief Barnett. We've worked together for a long time. I respect you a great deal. I respect you a great deal as well, Cleary. And it's not an individual thing on an individual officer. I believe I know the officer you're talking about. I would vouch for his credibility and his character as well. But it's a greater thing than that, than just those individuals. And yes, we could give story after story of some great individuals, and those are important stories, and those are important for our community. But it's a larger picture of that and building that cohesion. And that's why I say, and I asked the question of you earlier, how can an officer be on the force for that long and never have that experience before? You know, and I know we could look at those individual officers, but just generally speaking, any officer, how could you go that long and not have had these experiences and not have been told and shared the things that happened that day? I think that's wonderful. I think it's a blessing that happened. But for an officer in an agency to have gone that long and not have seen that, those are the things that as a black man, even as one with privilege and a platform and a status that I have, that still make me fearful in this community. And that's real talk, Chief. And so you know, I'm glad we had this discussion. I would love to continue it on further. Once again, thank the panelists, and I thank the folks that have come here tonight. We have more people here than we typically have on any city council meeting, unless there's something of a hot button issue. We have a number of eyes online as well. It's because the community wants to talk about this. And I'm glad you have opened yourself up, Chief. Seriously, you have a big heart, and you've opened it up even more to hear from your community, and you're sitting right here today as well. And so I appreciate that. And so we can continue to do that. And exactly what you all addressed, we're all eager to continue to work to that and work together to find that and close some of these loopholes and close some of these blindness that we have that a lot of times we don't see. So I appreciate each and every one of you all. I'm going to wrap it up now because I know I could probably go on a while on this subject, and it's very difficult to sit here and listen when you want to speak up a lot. But I took this middle position for a reason, and I wanted to listen myself. I thank each and every one of you for taking your time to come here. Happy Juneteenth, everyone.